where the council is gathered today. I'm here. I'm going to open today's briefing with a karakia. Kia hora te marano, kia whakapaku pounamu te moana. Hei hua rahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, araha atu, araha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. Thank you. For today's briefing, we have, I'll just go around the table here. We have Deputy Mayor Anna Curnow present. We have Councillor Peter Weddy present, Councillor Jonathan Larson, and we have Councillor Mark Vincent present. And joining us from, I'll say remotely, from the online world, we have Councillor Victoria de Olivares Woodcock and Councillor David Wills, both of whom are joining us over the internet. And we have apologies today from Councillor Wilson Collins, Councillor Joyce Haki. And that's it, yeah, because everyone else is accounted for here. Thank you. So, and sorry, and I'm here and I'm the mayor. Gavin, would you be able to adjust the camera, the monitor, because it's pointing at the ceiling? Thank you. That little camera, yeah. Thank you. So that the elected members can be seen. Yeah. Thank you.
They need to push it down, I think.
You need to lower the camera.
That's it. That's it.
Thank you.
Pointing at our feet.
So for today's briefing, we have a packed briefing ahead of us. And for the first of our items this morning, we're being joined by Sport Northland. So we have here with us the in-person, so if you'll please come forward, the chair of Sport Northland, Libby Jones, who is no stranger to Kaipara District Council, having been a councillor herself during the last triennium term of local government. So Libby, welcome home. Welcome, Libby. Haere mai. And also joining Libby, we have Brent Eastwood, the Chief Executive of Sport Northland. So it's great to welcome you both here this morning. Tēnā korua, welcome, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Right. Good.
Always warm and mungify. It's the tropics of mungify, I tell you. Yeah.
Oh, kia ora koutou. We'll just do a bit of an introduction so you know who we are, and then we'll get into the presentation. So tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko taupari toko maunga, ko waketo toko awa, ko arawa toko puka, no kerikiri rawa ahau, e taipura kaianga noho aha, ko Libby Jones toko ingoa. It's my pleasure to be here. Morena, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Brent introduce himself to you, and then we will begin.
Ko toko monga, Northern Wairau toko awa, Kaipara toko moana, ko te kaupuru toko tūranga waiwai, kei whangarei kaina. Ko te pauhiria o Hakinakana Tautokoro Mahiana, ko Brent Eastwood toko ingoa. No reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora matata katoa. Good everyone, my name is Brent Eastwood. Hopefully you gathered that I am a Kaipara lad from way back. Was born into Kaipara, spent my early years in Dargaville and down the Kaipara Harbour, so very much feel known when I come to KDC. Kia ora.
Kia ora, as do I. Lived in Kaipara now for 32 years, longer than I've lived anywhere else. So Northland and Kaipara have become my home as well, as you know. So really great to be here, and thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks for allowing us to be here in person, because I think it's a lot easier, even masks aside, to be able to connect face to face. And kia ora to David and Victoria online. David obviously is one of our representatives on Sport Northland. So what is, you've received this, all the our presentation, our information. So I guess what we wanted just to start with is what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Like, why are we looking for some change? So, there's probably three things in that. One of them is that, we as a Sport Northern board and organisation have made a commitment and changed the trustee at the end of last year to acknowledge the whakaputanga as well as Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and then have got some outcomes frameworks in relation to the board and the organisation as to what that looks like. One of those for the board is our membership. Which we've alluded to in here. So the question around that is our acknowledgement of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and how do we then partner with Māori, and our acknowledgement of Māori as tangata whenua of Northland. And then we're thinking about what our vision is, what is it that we do as Sport Northland, what are we wanting to achieve? And that is about increasing physical activity, movement of all Northlanders. And unless we do things different for Māori, then that dial is only going to shift very slowly. Things have increased. If we look at the traditional ways that we measure physical activity, we find that Māori, with a number of statistics in Northland, are at the lower end. So we don't know what we don't know. That is part of the other reason why we want to increase our Māori representation on our board. And then thirdly, we've talked in here about the size of our board, Sport Northern board, especially with our two interns, which has been a great project for us, enabling us to have younger voices on our board, can be quite unwieldy at times. It's quite a big board. And so that is when we changed our trustee, we changed the number of elected members. So we have 3 elected, 3 Māori appointed, one of those through Te Kahua Aotearoa, the iwi Chairs Board, and the other 2 through an appointments panel, which they are part of, and the Sport Northern appointments panel, and then the 3 elected. And then alongside that, we have 4 representatives from council for the 3 district councils and regional council. So looking at our size of our board, that was the other consideration for us. Well, okay, what are we achieving here, and are we is moving forward with 4 representatives still a useful and important factor for the board? Are there some other ways that we can get those voices heard? And does that allow us to meet our aim of 50% Māori on our board? So I guess that's a little bit more of a context. I don't know, do you want to add anything more to that?
I think the sort of the other rest of the reasoning, the sort of finer detail is in the document that we submitted. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So the questions for clarification. Questions here.
I do.
Councillor Kerner.
Yes, Jim, one of the points that you talk about in your report is the reporting to each council. Now, obviously, if you're looking at not having a member from each council, then that might need to step up. Do you have any thoughts around how you could maybe enhance that reporting to council if there were not a member from every council?
Right. We haven't got any firm things around that, Anna, and would be really open to ideas or what would work for council. Obviously, the current representatives do that in the way that suits them in their council now. We don't have any sort of planned process to say, well, this needs to go back, and it will determine a little bit about what's happening in areas. I mean, already we have Brent comes to with some of his team to present to the council, to the organisation. You know, there's a lot of work that goes on operationally, which are organisations. So we would be happy if it suited councils to have some connection with governance, with the council elected members, you know, throughout the year, whether that was monthly or annually, whatever worked, because I think, you know, Northland's small, we're only, with all, you know, the alignment of our vision and Upper District Council's vision and all the other visions, they're all there. So actually it makes sense for us to have a closer alignment around what we're doing and how we're doing what we're doing. So we'd certainly be open for that if that would be helpful for.
Yeah, I think we annually aren't we? I think we're annually where we come and present our report. So we submit sort of chat with you guys. I think that's annually. More than happy for that to be 6 monthly. Like actually we've done with Far North District Council.
Okay.
It's gone to 6 monthly. It is only a 10-minute slot, and you know, it's really speaking again to the report that we put in, and we do that 6 monthly with Far North. So again, if that makes it more transparent and we have better contact, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, just don't go and get a glass of water.
Councillor Withey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yep. Hi, Libby. Good to see you. I guess Northern Region's a big region, and Kaipara District Council, the Kaipara or the area is the smallest of the district councils and regional councils. Now, we've had experience with Northern Link where we found that we were conveniently overlooked on many times, and we've had to restructure that whole board and the way in which the shareholding to give all of the stakeholders a fair representation on what the activities are. I take Brent's point about having reporting, but reporting is always historic. Okay, we want to make sure we're part of the action. And so how do you see, if you've only got two representatives representing territorial authorities for the region, that all of them get a fair, crack of the whip, if you like, because there's no point in coming along and reporting to us even 6 months. You can report every month. But if it's all historic and we've not had any say in charting the direction of Sports Northland and what they're doing in terms of activities to make sure that Kaipara gets its fair share, then we could be finding ourselves in 3 years' time the same way as we found ourselves with Northern Link, sort of being conveniently forgotten.
I certainly wouldn't think that any reporting would only be historic. I hear what you're saying. For us, it would be much more about the conversation about where we go, what are the issues in Kaipara, what are we not taking account of. Some of the activities, obviously, we know, things happening in sports, but we know on the operations, what's happening, what vision, where do you see yourself going, what are you thinking around the next facilities, all of that is really information for us. So that would be my thinking.
There's one other way you could have.
The future as well as the past.
I think report
having two representatives from territorial authorities, you could have it that there would be one representative permanently from Kaipara, and then on a rotational basis, one other member representing the other councils.
Except for your mayor, because that's who we're thinking that this, potentially this decision could come from the mayoral forum. So, yeah.
And I guess Far North probably, I would suggest a similar thinking around what you've just mentioned there. Our sort of pre-thinking around having the mayoral forum determine who those two might be would come after our election and our appointment process, so that we already know where the other six come from, and we have got very good representation, I must say, from Kaipara and from Far North outside of the council meetings already, far more than we used to. We were very whangārei-centric for a long time. Our board is quite spread now, which is good. And so the mayoral forum could then, I would suggest, look at that spread and take that into it when they're making those two appointments.
Mm.
Okay, so kia ora. So as the chair forum.
I have a question, Mr Mayor.
Sorry, yes, Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock, we'll come to you in a moment. Sorry, I'd started speaking, sorry. As chair of the mayoral forum, I think it is interesting, your proposal and what you're talking to here, and I would dare say you're making a whole lot of assumptions, okay, into a future model which we can't yet see. So I'd just like to come back to what we can see and what we do know. And I endorse entirely what Councillor Withey said. I believe that your presentation here on page 1 of the agenda regarding your Board of Trustees, where you've pulled it out here and the text in bold. I'm just going to talk to the fact that you've said there that So it's slightly confusing, but one trustee to be appointed by each of the district and regional councils. So that's the current frame, yes? And you're then proposing this different frame, which is that the mayoral forum appoints 2 board members, yeah? I'm just trying to get that really simple. So, because what we have, you see, and I'll come back to your TDT principles, the TDT is all about ngā tangata katoa. It's about all the people, yeah? And the interesting thing is your 3 mayors of Northland represent ngā tangata katoa. Your chair of Northland Regional Council also represents ngā tangata katoa. None of the other groupings that are in your proposal represent ngā tangata katoa. So we have a really interesting aspect here regarding what you're talking about, because I just will remind you that the 3 mayors are directly represented and directly elected to represent all of the people. The MPs don't have that. The Prime Minister of New Zealand doesn't have that either. But regarding the simplicity of the system, okay, so from a governance level, I think it's really interesting what you're proposing. I'll come back to Councillor Weddy's perspective regarding ensuring for Kaipara district people that there's representation from the edges. Okay, we all know how Northland works with a centre in Whangarei, and then kind of aspects in most governance senses of people thinking about the rest being the hinterland. Yeah. And where we're at, especially for Kaipara district and all of its people, which is the fastest growing district in the North Island, and you've come here to Mangawhai, the fastest growing town in the North Island, right, today, so it's great to have you here in person, is that we want to make sure that in whatever proposals are coming, that the people of here don't get left behind. Because as Councillor Weddy said, actually, history shows us that all of these sorts of reforms, unless it's locked in, that the people at Kaipara do get left behind. Again and again and again. So why it's important for us is that right now, of course, with Sport Northland, you have the contract for Dargo swimming pool. And you're doing a wonderful job with that. And it's really important for our community and all of the ratepayers of Kaipara. So, if you like, on behalf of all of the ratepayers of Kaipara and all of the people, if you like, and as chair of the Northland Mayoral Forum, who actually gets to speak for all of the people, ngā tangata katoa, Te Tai Tokerau, which is, if you like, an appointed position on top of an elected position. You know, I urge you to consider again some of these propositions that you have here, so that it is better aligned with the principle of the te tiriti, ngā tangata katoa, not about structures. Yeah, so that would be my hope and wish for this work. Thank you. We'll go to Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tēnā koroa, Brent and Libby. So the points I would like to make is, the first point is that councils or territorial authorities have gambling policy. And when I attended a local government conference, a keynote speaker challenged all councils of New Zealand to get rid of pokie machines, because gambling abuse has a direct influence on household finances. And when our council, in my first term of serving the people, had to decide on whether to continue to allow pokie machines in Kaipara, the policy team pointed out that Kaipara people spend $3 million a year. That's, you know, parents spending the household finances on a gambling addiction. And the pokie machine grants that go back to sports and activities that are generally not used and participated in by tangata whenua and by the families and the children and the people who are more socioeconomically deprived. So it occurs to me that the goals of Sport Northland, which is to get our communities active, fit and healthy and playing sports and happy, and the territorial authorities' gambling policies can meet together. And so I'm questioning and putting it to you, Libby and Brent, why you would want to not have a direct appointment, or not appointment, but elected members from territorial authorities or councils on the board, as they are at the moment, because we the councillors are, you know, elected by the people, and it's also those same people that own the sports facilities and pay for them through our rates. So we need that representation, that coming together of all the different facets of the whole community to get the best outcome for the kids. So there's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And good morning to you both. I just wonder, in your process looking into this, have you taken into account the prospect of changes to the shape and form of local government in the foreseeable future? And in that, in terms of a mayoral forum, it might be a fairly lonely meeting of just one person, as there would be just one council in Northland, say. I mean, how would that shape up in your thinking to ensure, if I can loop back to, with Councillor Worthy started, that there was an ability for input and perspective from the fringes to the regional body?
So that's a good question. That's three good questions in a row. I guess just coming to that, I've not thought necessarily about that because we don't have anything on the table currently that we'll be looking at. But it does relate a little bit back to Jason's question about Ngā Tangata Katoa, 3 elected members, which I am now. So when I didn't stand again for Kaipara District Council, I still wanted to be involved in the Sport Northland Board, so I stood as an elected member and was elected on. So anybody can be an elected member on the whole of Northland, and that's what we do have. And that is a rotation, so they can only stay there 3 years and then can put themselves forward again or not. So we do have a bit of shift in those roles. So I guess, Mark, just thinking ahead, if that was the case and we had in our processes that the mayoral forum was appointing 1 or 2, because we'd still be having 2 until we would change that, then that could still occur. There could still be 2 people there. And if that didn't look like that was going to work, then we potentially would increase the number of the elected members of Sport Northland, so that then that increased if there was a different way to get a broader representation across Northland.
I guess my only other comment would be we are getting representation on the board now from the fringes, as you call it. Terrible word, isn't it? Fringes.
Yeah, I just made that up. Yeah.
But, you know, half of the board now comes from outside of Whangarei. So, you know, that is a big change from where we were previously. So, and of course, we're a regional organisation, and I can absolutely assure you that the Far North of Kaipara will never be forgotten as far as Sport Northland goes. We are a regional organisation, so we can't afford to be just providing services for Whangarei.
And I think, you know, adding to that, that we have stakeholders across the whole of the north and they actually wouldn't let us do that either. So, yeah, there are, yeah, I mean, I understand that there is current and there is history around smaller councils such as Clough being overlooked like that. We get that. And so that is, you know, understandable, that concern. From Sport Northland, that's not how we operate, but, you know, that's, we can say those words, but I guess that ring a bit hollow too, because you've had other experiences, or we've had other experiences in the provinces that would, you know, that see the otherwise, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Larson.
Oh, yeah, thanks for coming and presenting this. I concur with some of the points already made by Councillor Weddy and Mayor Smith, and we've only got 3 district councils. I can't understand why, as key sort of strategic partners of Sport Northland, you wouldn't just have someone from each of the district councils on there and not worry about whether we're represented or not represented by picking 2.
Yeah, so currently we have 4 because we have the regional council as well.
Yeah. Why can't you just have 4? I don't, you might be tipping the balance too far one way by, I mean, the linkages in a district council, regardless of what the future structure ends up being, we don't know that and we can't anticipate that. We have to deal with that when we get to it. But, you know, the linkages that a district council has in terms of its own assets and the understanding of all of the community assets that aren't actually in the council, but we have a lot to do with, for example, right where we are here now. I don't think there's any individuals from the community and other appointees that are going to have anywhere near the amount of reach and understanding and influence that can be collectively gained from a representative from a district council. And I think it's almost unfair on the chair of the mayoral forum to have to go and pick a couple of winners, because why not just have someone from each of those district councils, and whatever you want to do with the NRC that covers the entire area as well? Because if I happened to be the person for Kaipara and there wasn't a person from far north, I do not believe I could go anywhere near having adequate knowledge of the local communities and their needs and their facilities to ever be able to reasonably the whole area for Sport Northland. So I make that point quite firmly, and thank you very much.
But just as a reminder too, we get very, very good input from all the councils in the stuff that you're talking about. So Northland Sports Coalition represented, Kaipara District Council's represented on there. Kōkiri Te Waka Hauro, the regional strategy for sport and recreation and play, Kaipara District Council's represented on there. With your facilities, we have the Kaipara Spaces and Places Plan, which you have direct input into, and by virtue of that, have input into the Northland Sports Facilities Plan. So all that, Kaipara is represented on all of that. Remembering that at a board, it's really determining the strategic direction of the organisation, which does not come down into how much resources put into Kaipara. So that is the chief executive and the leadership's team's determination, which the board doesn't necessarily have to approve. So we are talking about at a governance level rather than at a management level.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think clearly the preference would be to have the 4 councils represented. But, and I don't know your process and for how you make these amendments, how much sort of you take into account the preference. But I think if if this change is to happen, then I think certainly the feedback from a governance level would be that we wouldn't, our connection is at the moment, because we have David on that board, so we feel confident that we are represented. Without that direct representation on the board, there would need to be a significant shift in the way that Sport Northland relates to this governance structure in order to give us that confidence that we are actually represented. Because, I mean, some of the things you've mentioned today, I don't really know about them. So, yeah, and perhaps if there was maybe an annual session where we actually just discuss whether the objectives of the council were included in your plans and you were able to demonstrate that, and then a mid-year session where we actually reflect on how's that going, is Kaipara's objectives getting met? And I understand that what you're saying is that a lot of that work is already happening, but it's just not getting to this level?
So do you feel you get that now though, Anna?
No, not really.
Even with David on the board, right? That's what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
David on the board, do you feel?
Because David's one of us, I feel confident that that's happening.
Right.
It's not that I know the details, but if David wasn't there, then I would need to get that confidence elsewhere.
And,
That's what I'm saying.
and importantly, in that accountability and representation aspect, David escalates matters, brings them to me regularly, and we'll discuss various matters that are happening at Sport Northland. He'll ask me for feedback or what I'm thinking about A, B, C or X, Y, Z that are on the Sport Northland agendas or whatever. And I'll say, I'm thinking this, I'm thinking the rest of the mayors are thinking this, I'm thinking the council's this, the people of Kaipara, I think it would think this is the way that we'd go. And he goes, thank you. And then he goes off and does his work as our representative chosen by this council into the Sport Northland body. If you like, that notion of him being able to bring things back and discuss them works very, very well. And if you like, you don't hear about that because it's working well. And that's a good part of accountability and representation and governance. So there's a lot that goes on that the current proposals that you have may be invisible to or not have visibility of. Yeah. And so I'm wanting to bring Councillor Wills into this in a moment so that we can hear from him with his perspective as our representative. And of course, he's in an interesting place there. But like I say, just for clarity, my perspective would be that you could have, because the district councils own the sports facilities, and as Councillor Larson says, are also aware of, for their communities, the sports facilities that the councils don't own. Yeah. I think the simplest thing would be to say that there are 3 district council representatives, 1 from each of the district councils. And when, as Councillor Vincent says, there's future reform, well, that change would need to change again. But kind of embedding with the current institutional structures, those safety nets for accountability and governance that we all need for these multi-million-dollar facilities, and the partnership with Sport Northland, which is engaged with activating the facilities, if you like, and making the people better who are using them. So that those linkages work right. Yeah. And that's what this is about, as far as I see. I'm keen to hear from Councillor Wills.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for inviting me into this conversation. I don't personally support any change in a governance structure away from elected representation being shifted to appointed representation. I know that this presentation has been directed at the council representation, but it's more part of a bigger picture of Sport Northland having gone down a path of looking to go to co-governance and the consequences of that, of having a 50% Maori represented board and the impact on having created a large, potentially unwieldy board structure. So, in my role, and I appreciate the kind words that yourself and the Deputy Mayor have said, it's a difficult position because it's a governance role, not an operational role. And you've got to be very careful that my role is purely in a governance. It's pushing the Kaipara objectives. Sorry, and I'm trying to be clear, but it's without getting involved in the operational side that we have those staff on the ground doing that work for us at the Kaipara level. But I have, under direction from the Mayor and also my own personal opinion, been opposing the loss of Kaipara representation on the Sport Northland board. But if there's a suggestion on how to retain that and stop the board becoming unwieldily large at something like 14 members, I look forward to anybody else's comments or suggestions on how to avoid that. One of the things which is really great, and it's a respect to Brent as the CEO, who's been in that role for as long as I've been in Northland, is this, that it's a very well-run operation with the current management and senior management in place. My concern would be if there's a change in that in the future, and that we lose that contact, which Brent made very clear, his relationship with the Kaipara and Te Kaupuru. If we lose that to the next CE sometime in the future, then that will actually take away our connection to Sport Northland. And also our loss of our mayor being the mayoral forum chair, which will be on rotation, is my understanding. We'll also lose that Kaipara influence on the next trustees. So, but my views I've expressed to Libby and to Brent. I don't support this loss of representation, particularly because Sport Northland's charter is to fund those areas that are poorer socioeconomically, such as the far north and the parts of the Kaipara, in particular the west. That's their charter, is to put their money and their resources into those areas. But thank you for letting me speak to this.
Thank you, that's very clear. So all the elected members have spoken here regarding, this is a briefing, so if you like, we're here, you brought us a proposal, we're here providing direction. I would like to hope that the direction has been quite clear from Kaipara District Council today. And look, we thank you for the work that's going on here. As Councillor Wills has said, how to create a board that's not enormous in size and has co-governance aspirations and is working for everyone all at once is a fine line to work through all of that. And we all have great confidence in you both as a chair and a chief executive with your respective experiences to navigate that fine line beautifully and get Sport Northland to a really good place. But I hope that today's direction here is clear for you.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for the variety of views. We heard from David, as he said, some discussion that he had with you, Jason, and that was really helped us to formulate our thoughts around that. So it's been really great to have everyone's input into that. So I really appreciate you giving us the time and for the discussion, because you know, it will help inform our thinking and our decision making. So I appreciate that.
And for the confidence that you have in us as an organisation. I also need, when you look at the comments around the table, you still want to be part of the organisation, which to me is fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Good luck. Here, kaha.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great day.
So our second item for today's briefing is the ADC transportation update. And so for this item, we have Kelvin Thomas from the Northern Transportation Alliance joining here. Morena, Kelvin.
Your worship.
Over to you, Calvin. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Meet everyone here. Good to be back again. I think the last update was a virtual one, so it's nice to be back in person. I will take the paper as read, but cover some of the key points through the presentation, and really just open for any questions on the transport program as it's progressing. So, I'll take you on control. Cool. So as you're all aware, the way the NTA is structured, we bring in staff from all four of the district and regional councils across Northland. We've been doing some work recently to get a good understanding of how these staff are utilised and resourced across the network. But as part of that as well, with the new FCP delivery, we introduced 9 new roles to support the increased transport programs across the region. The result of that was we've had 18 new staff commence with the NTA since July last year. And we managed to get them all together for the first time since that time last 2 weeks ago. So really good to get people in the same room and meeting their colleagues. But 7 of those new staff are KDC employees. So 6 replacements with 2 retirements, being Jim Hale back in June and more recently Sandy, medical retirement in January. 2 resignations and 2 internal promotions, which is really pleasing to see. So Iran was promoted from a road and corridor coordinator to a car specialist, and Bernard has been promoted from the WDC maintenance lead to the actual regional maintenance operations manager. So he's taken over from Aaron, who left us to go to Gisborne. So really started in that role in early March and doing good things. And then we also have a streetlight services specialist. So in terms of vacancies at the moment, we've got 5 across the region out of 73, with 2 of those having offers on the table and 2 being interviewed. So yeah, pretty good space in that area. The other thing that I mentioned is we do utilise the staff across the region. And interestingly, in the KDC space, while there's 15 employed staff, about 69 operations staff, on average there's 30 NTA staff touch on the delivery of KDC activities in any given month. So that's getting expertise to the transport safety specialists, some of the cross-council graduates, the moving into the traffic light space, and those sorts of things. So yeah, it's starting to really show the benefit. Just for reference, I think WDC and FMDC employ about 23 to 25 each, and they average about 40 staff touching on their activities. So it is a cross-regional sharing of resources. I guess one of the other benefits we had, that we've introduced our values across the NTA. We introduced them at the start of last year, and in February this year we managed to have our first annual values awards. And pleasingly, Iran was awarded with the Respect Award, so she definitely earned it and was celebrated in that. We had a good representation across all 4 councils of award winners. And Andy Brown was the successful recipient of the contribution to KDC Roading for the work he's been doing over the last few years with the Unfield Road Centre of Excellence theory and everything else. Good to see that award coming back to a KDC employed person. Last year, out of interest, Rachel Mannion was awarded that award, which was good to see a non-KDC. I guess any questions about staffing before we, and the organisation at all before we?
Just very quickly, Calvin, a couple of years ago, you had significant numbers of gaps in your presentations to us. You were saying, gosh, the NTA just had significant gaps in the org chart needing to be filled. So what we're seeing now is that era's in the past, everything, if you like, got filled, and now there's churn.
It's happening, yes.
So,
When I started in February 19, there were 19 vacancies out of 64 at that stage. We had them filled in 18 months. So mid 2020, we had all positions filled. We then had a period of stability through to about June last year. And then in June, July, through to January, I think we had 9 or 10 resignations. Now, the majority of those were people who'd come to Northland as part of the initial recruitment and then hadn't settled, or their families hadn't settled for some reason. In saying that, 4 of the losses were young graduates, and given they've been with us 2 years, given the pressure on hiring at the moment, they were offered positions in other councils around the country that were non-graduate positions that we put an offer them. So in some respects, we've helped the industry, but we've managed to get 4 new graduates come in and they've been with us for about 6 months and starting to really thrive as well. So we're in a good space.
okay, so in summary, you're going, there is turnover, but you're feeling it's in a good.
And the turnover seems to have settled again. We're predicting by July this year, we'll be back to about 10 to 12% rather than the 20 that we had.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
The next topic is one.
Oh, excuse me, Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock has a question. Sorry, it's very.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock from here.
Thank you. Hi, Kelvin. My question is to pick up on the point in the report about health and safety PCBU obligations maybe being somewhat hampered by the exigencies of the NTA structure across the 3 or 4 councils. So my question is that having any impact on the scrutiny of suppliers' practices? And does the NTA look into that in terms of, I'm not talking about necessarily accidents or mishaps, but rather workers or employees' working conditions?
So the organisational risk was the slide I'm about to move on to, and in that case,
okay, so Councillor De Lavaris, we'll just hold your question and we'll get through the presentation and cover it, and that may help clarify. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, as I've summarised in the paper, we have reported to the Mayoral Forum back in November regarding the organisational risks of the current structure, being a non-legal entity, and some of the risks around delegations, triangular employment, and health and safety PCBU responsibilities. We have process mitigations in place for those, but generally they fall back on the individual council processes. So whatever the health and safety requirements of a council is for a contractor are what we enforce. The complication comes is using Rachel, who I mentioned earlier, as an example. She is employed by WDC, principal representation as the project manager for KDC Works, but the contract for the works sits between KDC and the contractor. So there's no contractual relationship of Rachel's involvement. When it comes to health and safety terms, obligations, and when the contractor is meeting those obligations, Rachel acts in the best interests of KDC to put those into place, but there is no legal chain of command, and that's where the risk sits. What we have attempted to do to mitigate it is we have or to simplify it, I guess, for our own stuff, is we now have a single NTA health and safety policy, which is agreed by all 4 of the council health and safety departments. So we at least have a consistent approach of how we apply those. But the current situation is that without the legal framework, joining those together when it comes to the chain of command or chain of responsibility for PCBU, for health and safety, the issuing of delegations for certain things like road stopping, even financial delegations are quite complex and often having to have people taking a delegation because they're employed by a council as opposed to because they're responsible for that work, which isn't necessarily an ideal situation. So the next step in that process is a workshop that's scheduled for the 30th of June with the Alliance Leadership Group, so the 4 CEs and Steve, to work through the risks and potential mitigation options in detail. And then coming out of that, we will look to see the development of information, including costings and business cases of what it might look like in the future to mitigate these risks, to likely present to the new triennial councils with any kind of clean timeline likely to be needing any inclusion in the 2024 LTPs. What's going to be a structural change. In the meantime, we continue to have an improvement plan in the background. As we identify little mitigations, we're able to implement them as we can. So some of the examples of that are the health and safety policy I mentioned. One of our previous information constraints was the fact that we didn't have access to each other's schedules or even Teams environments. So we now have the NTA Teams environment, so at least all our staff are on the same platform. So some of those are progressing, but it's still a risk.
Thank you. Councillor De La Varas Woodcock, has your question been answered and addressed?
Not satisfactorily, but it's not the presenter's presentation, but rather more the detail of that I would require, and I will take that to an email correspondence request.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Councillor Curnow.
I just wanted to, in reading the report, I really honed in on that Poto Road seal extension incident that the loader rolled over. And what stood out to me was in the bullet points, the assessment was not followed. The investigation did not go through the control hierarchy. The reporting was not followed and the reporting timelines took too long. So is what you're doing now, is that going to fix that? Because it seems to me that there's something systemic that fell over in that beside the loader.
So there was, with that and a couple of other incidents, we identified that there was a gap in the maintenance contract, health and safety reporting requirements, in terms of defining timeframes that were required. So that was the first thing. We put out a notice to contractor of all 5 of those contracts to define those timeframes, which are more aligned with the individual council health and safety policies themselves. The other thing, we've been working very closely with Ventia and a couple of other contractors in this case in terms of reporting quality and making sure that reports themselves have the appropriate expertise assigned to them given the severity of the incident. They're focusing on the root causes and using the hierarchy of controls in terms of their lessons learned and corrective actions. There was a bit of a trend of the more administrative. We talked to the staff at the meeting about the importance of this as opposed to something procedural that would lock in those changes. So those are ongoing, but as part of it as well, our maintenance leads like Bernard and Tim are also actively contributing to the monthly safety meetings that the contractors have.
So do you feel that what happened there is unlikely to happen again in terms of the sort of...
The incident itself is still a work in progress.
Yes.
The reporting side of it, I would be extremely disappointed if we were getting that level of support, reporting immaturity, given the work that we've been doing today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wills has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Calvin, hi, good morning.
Morning.
My questions, I was waiting, but we seem to have got to the subject of the health and safety, with a touch on that Poto Road one. There's been, in that report, there was a list of 4 or 5 quite serious incidents that it was mentioned that there was no injury, but that doesn't take away from the seriousness of the accidents, and the potential loss of life. My question is that you mention in here that you've referred numerous times to the administrative processes and that, and you've also alluded in your report. What are the two questions? One, what are the consequences for the contractors? Because at this stage, it doesn't appear to have been any. And I'm talking about whether it's a financial or a potential loss of future contracts. Apart from the correspondence, what are you doing to make a point that we can't accept this level of accident in our contractors?
So through the chair, there's multiple ways that this is addressed through the contract framework. So firstly, the direct impact is on their health and safety KPM for any given month, that annual health and safety KPM, which is a direct financial impact on those contractors. Where they, both in the maintenance contract and individual project contracts, there's a system called PACE scoring, which is the historic performance of a contractor on any given works. These incidents reflect on their future PACE scores, which are then taken into account as a non-price attribute when they're bidding for future works. So there are processes in place to actually ensure that the implications of these are adequately captured, but also noting that one of the key drivers out of these incidents that we focus on is ensuring that the corrective actions are identified in a way that prevent it happening again. And definitely agree that these are all serious incidents. That's why they're noted there as significant. In all cases, the people involved effectively got a free lesson from an injury perspective. But our key focus is making sure that lesson is then shared with others and the processes are amended to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But there are contractual mechanisms, Councillor Wills, to reflect their previous performance.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just want a couple more quick questions. I'm not looking so much for the administrative consequences, but I do understand the importance of them. But for example, my understanding is there's been a couple of fatalities on our ports in the last few months. And there's been talk, for example, of the CEO being prosecuted through the court system for not having provided a safe work environment. I mean, that's the level that the government's looking to take this unnecessary loss of life on the work sites to. I understand that these haven't been loss of life, but they potentially, or each one of those could easily have been so. Where does the responsibility stop?
Present for KDC Works, it stops with Louise, but that is going back to that issue that we highlighted in the organisational risks about the unclarity of PCBU responsibilities, and that is one of the things. Contractually, you can't contract out of your PCBU responsibilities, so there is that hierarchy of chain of command, and that's where our role is to ensure that the contractors have adequate critical risk mitigation processes in place to prevent these incidents occurring.
And I'll accept the answer. Thanks, Gavin. And then just for brevity, is with the heavy loading of additional works that we've had over the last few years, including the PGF money and that, has there been a loss of expertise in a lot of this machinery operators? Has there been a skill loss that's potentially led to some of these accidents happening when they might not have in the past?
Anecdotally, we don't believe there's a skill loss. What we are seeing is a pressure on the mid-level management resourcing. And that is that site supervision and the planning and coordination, particularly with the constraints on bringing in additional resources from overseas. We have had a number of our contractors speaking to us about the troubles of backfilling those that first line management experience resource. And that is one area that with the borders opening at the moment, they've had a number of candidates on their books waiting to be able to come in to fill those gaps, to help with the civil experience and go alongside the local knowledge that's already there. At an operator level, part of the work that Andy's been doing with Bernard and Tim on the Centre of Excellence is recognising that in some cases there's no real formal qualification around grading in some of those areas. And it's an industry lack of qualification that not formally, but informally with some of the training providers and CCNZ in terms of how we can actually lift the game in that area in terms of what the qualifications are and how they get that experience through. I think the key thing we're finding as a theme through these incidents, Councillor Wills, is that site experience, the supervision, and the person who has the planning knowledge to understand what could go wrong as opposed to just focusing on driving bigger, that wider picture. And that's something we're working with the contractors at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it's made a note there of just about the fact that the person doing the operation couldn't even read a plan to understand that there were cables under the ground. I mean, that's quite shocking that skill set wasn't sufficient, or that person was in such a hurry that they didn't understand what they were digging into. But thank you for your answers.
Could have been very shocking, yes.
Thank you, Cal, back to you.
So the next slide, I think, was on the finance and operation.
Actually, could I just ask a question, Mr. Mayor, regarding the risk management aspect? I just wonder if there is a little elephant in the room here, in that, like, one way to manage that risk would be to form a separate entity, to coin a phrase, which would then, that's perhaps where in that entity the final responsibility might rest, as we would just be a purchaser of the services of this other entity, which we could, for convenience sake, call entity A. I don't know, but yes.
Thank you.
So is that anywhere in the background of the thinking to resolve this? Because it seems like it's a threshold. It's all the questions seem to point to, well, that problem would be solved if you were all part of one organisation.
That is definitely part of the discussion in terms of options, and that's part of the workshop option and part of the workshop theme on the 30th of June is to work through the various options. Those options obviously range from going back to individual roading departments right through to a formal entity. And so that's part of the discussion on the 30th. Once that desired, I mean, there's two parts to the equation. There's I guess the more structured, formal costing, understand the building a business case for a desired future state. But then with 4 council partners, there's an LTP process to go through for 4 councils to agree on that desired future state as well. So our first step is to get the background and desired future direction, and then move into next year socialising that with the elected members from all 4 councils and socialising the risk further and possible mitigations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Financials.
Okay.
So as Councillor Wills alluded to, we've had some busy couple of years, and while this year our business as usual has been expenditure has been impacted by the delays in the NLTP funding and subsequent council confirmation of budgets. We have been keeping the contracting market very busy with the externally funded workspace with obviously Mangawhai, Photo Road, Waipa River Road and the Unsealed Road Centre of Excellence works. So overall, we're tracking about 20% ahead of expenditure compared to last financial year in the same period, which considering last financial year was a record expenditure for the team and across the region is definitely putting some strain on the contractors. But our biggest shift in this area is about getting 3-year programs out to the contractors for this particular skill types. So they've got that forward pipeline of work and there's a bit more flexibility in terms of delivery time so that they can better use the seasons and their workforce in a more less peaky way of doing things. So we were concerned probably this time last year about the cliff of the PGF works dropping off and externally funded works and the signals around the NLTP funding with the kind of delays and some of these PGF projects now just coming to an end and some of year one's work being pushed into year 2 and 3, that cliff has become more of a gentle decline or almost a steady state flat. So from a contractor perspective, it doesn't look as dire as it did this time last year.
It's encouraging. Just on this, I'd just like to come back to your business as usual, minus 36%. That is very, very significant. What we get as elected members from the people of the district is exactly that. We get it in the neck. Every day, my inbox as the mayor is saying, what's happened to business as usual? So my question, kind of for clarification, you've given the reason why, and which is to do with the delay in the NLTP announcements and then that all the council plans had to be changed. Nevertheless, we're tracking towards a significant non-performance in business as usual roading based on this, what we're seeing here. And that just affects most of the people in the district. What are we going to do about that?
So if we refer back to when we brought the paper to council regarding the budget, the proposal in that was, well, the risk was highlighted that year one would not be delivered in full. Now, keeping in mind that business as usual covers everything from grading on the roads through to the projects that we're actually delivering, and the majority of the shortfall is actually on the capital works projects, not on the maintenance. So just that's one point. But when we spoke about that, the shift is to ensure that we deliver the 3-year subsidised program over the 2.5-year period that we ended up having. So the intent and the current plan and program is still on track to make the full subsidised 3-year program over the 3 years. It's just we missed half a component because of the timing. So that construction season work from that was originally planned in the LTP for last year is scheduled to be delivered in the year 2 and year 3 plans. So at this stage, we are on track still to deliver the full 3-year LTP program on a business as usual status.
Okay.
And just reinforcing that maintenance side, it's not the maintenance where the shortfalls are, because we knew we continued with a normal level of maintenance even while budgets were being confirmed. It was predominantly the capital works and low cost, low risk that we had to wait till November, and that's shown in the capital works graph where there's almost no expenditure for the first 4 months, and that's where the biggest impact is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, that's clear.
Probably the other point on that slide is the Whakatahi audits. So we had the technical audit in December, and final audit report was no issues of major significance, which was they always find some small corrective actions, but that was based on the quality of works. That audit focuses on the quality of works that have been done on the network, and there was some really positive feedback around the Unsealed Road Centre of Excellence. There was also consistent positive feedback for the KDC audit, the WDC and FNDC about the strategies that are in place to address the known issues, and those audits also highlighted that those strategies seem to be aligned with sufficient funding to improving the asset classes in those areas. The financial and procurement audit is scheduled to take place next week, I believe. So that covers the last 4 years of how KDC have claimed against subsidy, and those reviews on 1 or 2 significant capital procurements, which are following the council and Whakatane procurement process. What is good to see at the moment is the last of the procedural audit, last of the 6 audits across the 3 district councils. And to date, we're getting very consistent results from the audits, which is showing that the NTA approach of consistency is being spread out across those processes over the last few years. If we move to operational highlights. So as I mentioned, so the Unsealed Road expenditure it's the primary maintenance expenditure is tracking well, 60% of annual budget to the end of March. I think I explained this time last year that it being a seasonal activity, we tend to have a peak in autumn and a peak in spring and a peak in autumn. Bernard's very confident that we're going to complete the maintenance program. We've managed to get through, as well as the externally funded works, which are on track to be physically complete by the end of this financial year. And there's obviously separate reporting for that. And we do analysis of maintenance work volumes on a month-to-month basis. Over the current year, those are consistent with the plan. So whether that's cubic meters of metal being put on the ground or road sign replacements or vegetation, the volumes are tracking to plan at present. And in capital works, that's the area that we have had some slow start issues, and that's where you'll note on the little grey dot on the bottom doesn't actually leave the 0 mark until December. And that's after the budgets were confirmed and then the capital works program started kicking off. But we are now tracking to the orange line forecast that we indicated in that first one. Those carry forward scheduled for the next 2 years.
Councillor Turner.
I just had a question on that table on the slide where you've got the will be fully delivered, will be partly delivered, and at risk of not being delivered.
Yes.
And we're talking about 10% of capital works at risk of not being delivered. So presumably those will just get carried forward into the next year. Is there any way of assessing in the orange zone, the 14% will be partly delivered, sort of to what extent they'll be partly delivered? So what I'm looking for is, we're looking at, if you look at the green, 75% will be delivered. What part of that 14% will also be, how far delivered?
Within the underlying report, there is a detailed level of each project within that orange.
Right.
So some of those may be that we've only done the design, so it might be 50,000 of $1 million or $500,000 project. Other cases of 90%. From my recollection in the last discussion with Greg, about 80% of it will be delivered.
Okay.
So it's those are in-flight projects where we might be spanning into July, August to complete them, as opposed to stuff that is a major contributor.
So we'll be well into the 80% delivery on capital works.
I believe so, yeah, that's where we're looking at.
Okay, that's comforting, thank you.
That's the end of the slides.
Councillor De La Vaz Woodcock has her hand raised.
Yes, thank you. My question, Kelvin, is about the the link between customer service requests for maintenance of our roading network unsealed or otherwise.
Excuse me, councillor, we haven't quite got to that yet.
I've finished the presentation, so that's in.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, sorry, proceed, councillor, sorry.
Thank you, Mr.
Start
Mayor.
again.
Yes, so I'm wondering about, can you make it explicit for me? Because how we get a service request and a response to meet together and achieve satisfaction and results for our ratepayers, because I'm frustrated as an elected member that it seems that there's not a tangible connection when there ought to be. Or, you know, that would be great if we can get the people in Kaipara that ring up, make that effort to go, you know, the road's impassable, or there's dangerous potholes that are unfilled, and then there's a response that's timely, and that would give so much good reward to the council's reputation and to the people for just going about their lives. So that's my question. And another one is also about slips. You know, from recollection, there are 300 slips around the district, and every winter with weather events, we seem to get more. Do they come under CAPEX, or are they part of our maintenance and operations workload? Thank you.
I'll cover the customer request component of that first. So the customer requests generally are responded to within the timeframes. As you're aware, the maintenance contracts are an inspection-led contract, and we are often finding that the complaint road has already been identified through the maintenance contract and is working through the cycle of being responded to. We've identified a couple of issues with our closeout of requests. One is that the contractor will close out the request if he has scheduled the work, which in some cases the customer gets a response to say the work's completed, but it's actually scheduled to be completed. So we're working through that with the customer service team, and it's actually something across all three councils that's an issue for us. The other thing is that often the customer requests are requesting a level of service that is greater than what is funded. And so in those cases, we will be responding in terms of, these are the defects we've identified, these are the defects that are being resolved by the state, but we acknowledge there are certain levels of defects that are either within spec. So just because there's a small pothole doesn't mean it's necessarily of a size that has triggered intervention because of the levels of service. Or there are some things like slips that are what are classed as ordered works and need to be prioritised against all the other budgets across, all the other defects across the district. So we have significantly more logged defects than we have budget available to fix them. Slips is a case in point. So slips are generally a capital works activity under low cost, low risk as part of the resilience category. We have a resilience response strategy which assesses all the slips across the district and the region and then prioritises them. That prioritisation then goes into the funding application on every 3 years. But given the current funding, that it will not address the 300 slips. In saying that, those slips are continually monitored, whether depending on the severity of the slip, whether it's monthly, quarterly, 6 monthly or annually, and any significant movement is then highlighted and reprioritised. So the funding covers those that are either a safety issue, a access issue, or a significant developing, changing situation that we need to address. So, given the current funding models, we haven't got the capacity to fix 300, but we're continuing to address them on the first served basis.
First come, first served, you say?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, not first or last. It is definitely dependent on on the impact of the slip. And one of the other attributes is the potential for further damage if we're noticing movement. Then obviously we would like to fix it at a point where it's a $50,000 fix rather than when the road completely gives way and it becomes a $1 million fix. So that's part of the consideration.
Thank you, Kelvin. That's a lot to take in and consider, but thank you.
Thank you, councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Kelvin, it's a technical question, I guess, in relation to the Page Green treatment, just observing, I just noticed a certain amount of corrugations happening on the edges of the road. And if it was a regular road, I'd say, well, the obvious thing is just get a grader in there and reshape it. But is that still feasible with that Page Green surface, or does that just stuff up the whole basis upon which it's being developed?
Not being a roading engineer, I will take that question away and ask Bernard. I believe the Page Green still is able to be graded. It's just about the makeup of the methodology is about the base course and the makeup of the running course and everything else. And my understanding is that we grade as normal when required.
Okay.
They just pull all the running course back in. And I'll get that confirmed from Bernard. The benefit of the Page Green is you should have longer intervals between your grading interventions. Don't actually have grading.
Okay.
But I'll check that on with Bernard.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Is there a specific road?
Well, there's one that I live on.
I'm reassuring that councillors still talk about the roads though.
I'm just concerned that if it's on that road's had the treatment, if other roads have had the same treatment, if that has broader implications, right? So, I mean, it's.
Yeah, the Page Green methodology isn't a silver bullet in terms of like a sealed road and treat and walk away. It's about prolonging the life and reduced maintenance intervention, not no maintenance intervention.
Kelvin, question from me regarding your annual customer satisfaction results summary. One of the factors that's missing in this, and I would suggest for future years, is that you overlay this, so it's on page, I was going to say 11 of the report. Yeah. So this is where Kaipara District has had 883 respondents, survey participants. Yeah. That you overlay this with the number, either the number of citizens in the district or the number of ratepayers in the district or a number of adults in the district, some kind of other measure. The reason why is because Kaipara here has 883 participants. We've only got 25,000 people in Kaipara. We're only, I'm going to say 10% of Northland's population. And yet, this is by far the largest response to your survey. People are more interested in Kaipara about roads based on this survey than they are anywhere else in the region. Okay?
Just to clarify, these aren't transport specific surveys. So these are the council's own surveys about all of their districts. So this is this is a credit to Kaipara in terms of their engagement.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. But I take the point particularly about the comparator for future ones, because one of the issues we have is the small volume of numbers on the monthly comparator. So that.
Yeah, so Kaipara District Council through our Chief Executive Louise has worked very hard on engagement with our community through multiple channels and Facebook and people's panels and all sorts of digital tools and so on. Just what I'm saying is that level of relative engagement around the region and making that a relative comparison rather than the margin of error in the research, but actually also the Kaipara people are really clear about this and others aren't engaging as much. So, and I would say in Kaipara's case, that speaks to the history here of governance issues in the past and roading issues in the past, particularly because the people keep telling us that we're a roading company, first and foremost, as a council. Yeah. So that's very reflective here, but I'd love to see that relative comparison based on populations in the various districts. Thank you for that. Councillor Weddy.
We're talking about customer responses that were, I think Councillor Delavaris would mention, we've just got one in. And seeing you're here, Paul of Confident Care, who has complained to council before, we had 60 millimetres of rain in Mangawhai last night, and the Cove Road culvert, which he complained about in September last year after we had another downpour, hasn't had any remedial work done on it and is completely blocked up. And he's given us 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 photographs to support his moaning about the issue that we haven't done anything about. So that falls into one of your maintenance areas. Shall we forward it on to you for?
It should be raised as a normal customer
I've
request.
sent it to Linda.
Hmm?
I've sent it to Linda.
Good, okay, thank you.
Because often what we find, and in particular in the last few months with some of these rainfall events, the design of the culvert is for a 1 in 5 year event. And the culvert and the events we're having while they're becoming more frequent, are of a volume that's higher than that. So often maintenance isn't necessarily the thing that's going to fix it, but we will.
I think have a look at it. This one here is pretty full of weeds and rubbish.
Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you. That one's under control. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Wills has a question. His hand's up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to note as the West Coast councillor that the Mangawhai councillor actually didn't know the process, which suggests that the issues with the roads are all on our side. Just thought I'd mention that.
Right,
I'm not going
thank
to
you.
comment on that.
With that moment of jollity, look, thank you, Kelvin, for your presentation today. Thank you for the work that's going on regarding our roads. And we wish you safe travels and good luck with your 30 June workshop.
Thank you.
Regarding the new potential structure options. Yeah.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you. At this point, we're right on time, Council, and so we're adjourning the briefing for 10 minutes for a break. We'll resume at 11:10, where we will be having a presentation from Steve Mutton from Waka Kotahi, who has joined us today. 10 minutes time. Ka kite.
spend the money. It's about how we use all the money that's in the National Transport Fund and how we direct it into all the activities that end up with investment in our communities. Now, it's really interesting because every time there's a change in government, this document changes, and it's a real challenge for us. We do have our 10-year plans, we do have our 30-year plans, but there are little tweaks and changes that happen each time the government comes in. So this government is very focused on those 4 strategic priorities you can see on the right there, which is about safety, about making sure no one is killed or seriously injured on our roads. It's about better travel options. It's about giving people choice about how they travel around New Zealand and for economic and social opportunities. It's about climate change, which is reducing transport emissions. Then it's about improving freight connections, which is that for the economic development of the country. Now, this government policy statement is really focused on urban centres. So it's about, especially the bit about better travel options. Now, it's about giving people choices about how they move around by using different types of modes, walking, cycling, public transport, ferries, buses, and then vehicles. What that means, it's a real challenge for councils like Kaipara, who, we know that the populations are diverse and dispersed. We know that the community is very dependent on vehicles to get to where they want to be, to get to work, to get to education, to get to healthcare. So it makes it really difficult for us to have conversations around investment in the communities when the government's very clear in what they're telling us we need to spend the money on. So in the slide here, there's 4 strategic priorities that the government's really committed on. One is Auckland Transport Alignment Projects, or ATAC, so it's pouring money into in fact, probably over the last 2 weeks, I've opened up a bus station, a busway, and 2 walking and cycling paths. Now, that's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in there, but you can see where this focus, where this government is in those types of investments. Let's Get Wellington Moving, there's another one, which is very targeted around getting mass transit of people moving, Road to Zero, and also the New Zealand Rail Plan. So as you can see, there's a whole mix of stuff that we need to balance when we think about investments in the community. Now, just a quick one about the National Land Transport Fund and the revenue and how it flows in and out. Is the NLTF, National Land Transport Fund, so think of it as a pie, and it's got to be topped up with money. 90% of that money comes from fuel exercise duty and also with visa charges. And I guess when you think about it with COVID, with the price of petrol now, with people working quite differently, working from home, our revenues, just like yours, has really dived. In fact, just quietly, we're actually 600 million below our bottom scenario. So that's how quite serious it is in terms of our revenue. Now, the NLTF has this money put aside, sitting in there, and that's where we use that money to deliver on the National Land Transport Program. Now, the National Land Transport Program pays the Waka Kotahi projects, plus it pays for a percentage of yours. So with your investment, our investment, that goes into the NLTP, which turns into projects, which is delivering outcomes for our communities. Now, the NLTP was designed to keep politicians out of decision-making, but as you can see from this government, there's a lot of other funds flowing in. And it could be the New Zealand Upgrade Program, there's the, previously it was the Provincial Growth Fund, there's infrastructure improvements, a whole lot of other things. But all that money comes together to delivering everything that's in the NLTP. Now, what's happening here?
We'll just take the question, up we go.
What we're seeing, before I come to you, sorry, what we're seeing is revenue going down, and what we're seeing is costs going up significantly.
Yeah, no, thanks, Stephen. Just, currently the government's drive obviously is to get people out of combustion-driven cars into electric-driven cars. And of course, your road user charges are being impacted by this strategy. what do you see as becoming the future on road users charges for the electric fleet as it grows within New Zealand?
That's a really good question, and it goes into exactly around my next slide, which is with the last MLTP and that we released, it was actually late being released, which unfortunately has compounded work for Kelvin to get his program done in time, hence the delay in the first year. It was because we realised that all the requests and the demand on what needed to be done, there was not enough money in the fund. So we went back to the government and said, we've got a major problem here, what do you want to do? In the end, the government agreed reluctantly to give us a $2 billion loan, which meant that we were able to fund at least the maintenance and operations and the continuous program work. What that means though is that we've got a massive hole coming. So as I mentioned, we've got less revenue coming in because we're trying to get people out of cars, like you're saying, into other forms of transport. We're trying to get more efficient vehicles. We're trying to get reducing vehicle miles travelled, so it reduces our revenue. And on the other hand, we've got costs going up. The network's getting bigger. It's getting more complex. So there's a big gap growing. So we've gone to the government and said, we really need to sort this. So the government endorsed Ministry of Transport to do a review on the funding model. So that is underway and we haven't heard anything from it yet, but we expect sort of after August, we should see some outcome from that review. Now, I think it'll be a mixture of getting some sort of revenue from electric vehicles who are currently not covered under RUT. I think there will be congestion pricing in the bigger urban centres. So I think we'll see a mix of things that will come out from this, but that's only my view at this stage.
So if I may ask, do you get the GST on the excise duty?
No, so it's purely just the
Excise duty itself.
excise duty itself that goes in.
So what amount would that be? Another 10, 15%?
Not sure.
Oh, you don't know how much you get from excise duty?
Not on top of my head, but it is 90 with the RUC and the Fed, it's 90% of the revenue, and we typically spend about 15 billion over a 3-year period.
Excuse me, Steve, just you mentioned there about congestion charging. So if I could just ask a question there. We've seen various reports in the newspaper about that for Auckland. Just for clarity, because it kind of says like concentric circles of the plan over various future decades of time or 5-year lumps or whatever. The state highway corridor, if you like, that connects all of Northland with the rest of the country through Auckland, of course, goes through the very centre of Auckland. Is that in any way impacted by the congestion charge, or is it not? Are the people of Northland going to have to pay the congestion charge to get to the rest of New Zealand?
That's not clear yet. So we're going through different phases in terms of determining the congestion pricing outcome. It's actually not been driven by us. It's once again, it's an MOT project. It's coming down to two models, which you'll see around the world. There is that ring type approach that you talked about, but there are other models around the world that's been quite successful looking at corridors. And as an example, like a really good one could be Lake Road in Devonport or Pickering Highway out to Bucklands Beach, Howick. So those are two very constrained corridors, local road corridors. So we need to have some sort of levers and mechanism to get people to put down their cars and take a different form of transport. And that's when you use congestion pricing to change the behaviours of people. So at this stage, we don't know how it's going to go yet.
Okay, so I guess you can hear some sensitivity there about Northland not being overlooked.
Correct.
In those trying to fix those issues for Auckland City.
That's right. Yeah. So Yeah, it's something that you.
Thank you. Carry on.
So this just leads to the emissions reduction plan. So the government's got a strategy of reducing emissions reduction on transport related activities by 41% by 2035. So that's of the 2019 levels. And they've just released 17th of May, the emissions reduction plan. And I guess there's three things in here that's really focusing on, which is around reducing reliance on vehicles. So what they're looking at is a reduction in vehicle kilometres travelled by getting people into other forms of transport. There's actually a statistic, I think 72% of people who use their vehicles travel less than 5 kilometres. Now, I know that's probably all in urban centres, so if they could walk, bike, use public transport, then even if we've got a 10, 20% out of the car, that makes a big difference. The other one is really adopting those low emission vehicles and expediting more electric vehicles or other forms of low emission vehicles. And the other one is around really focusing on the heavy transport sector and freight, about getting them to a more low emission type mode. Not each, you've got to do all of these really to hit the target. You can't just pick on one or two. It's got to be a system approach. And I think there's going to have to be a real behavioural change on how people think about how they move around New Zealand to achieve this. But the Mayor of Auckland has put a 64% reduction of emissions in Auckland. So he's got really aspirational. When I look at the 41%, I think it's quite realistic to say we're going to have to look to the big centres to achieve this. You know, as I mentioned earlier, Kaipara, you know, our communities need to use their vehicles. They don't have other public transport options. They don't have walking and cycling paths. They have a beautiful one here. But, you know, we really need to put the focus on our urban centres to pull their weight for the rest of New Zealand.
I'm just thinking about Kaipara. I was listening the other day to some people talking about hydrogen heavy transport and how that is actually gathering pace quite fast. There is one company that's now putting in the infrastructure to do the charging of hydrogen vehicles, and that heavy transport is actually really good in the hydrogen space. Do you know of anything that's happening in Kaipara or Northland around putting in that infrastructure? Because that, you know, each truck equates to, what is it, 140 cars? And we have a lot of trucks.
We have a lot of trucks.
We have a lot of cars, but we have a lot of trucks. So we could actually play our part by really supporting that move.
So I'm not personally aware of any infrastructure going in.
Okay.
Sort of where we're focusing, Whakataki at this stage is rail has come into our portfolio. So it's looking at the options around, you know, how do we best move freight to reduce the emissions footprint? You know, is it via trucks, is it via trains, is it via coastal shipping?
Sure, though, I was just going to ask, is coastal shipping part of the equation as well?
It is. So for the first time in this NLTP period, the government put rail in under our portfolio, but also coastal shipping. It was only 30 million they put in. So just recently, we went out for expressions of interest on how we can use some of that funding. Unfortunately, Northport missed out, which was really unfortunate. But there are a lot of investment around New Zealand in that space. But it's very much looking at, you know, as a country, how do we best move freight most efficiently and effectively? So just moving into some other important for Urahi. I know it's not in Urahi, but I know that, you know, a lot of people travel south to be interested in the Pūhoi to Walk With project. Look, this photo here is actually, we blessed this the other morning, a couple of weeks ago, which is some of the cultural artwork that we're going to have along that corridor. I think it's great that Whakatahi is doing this because it gets us to talk about our heritage and our culture and keeps those stories alive. So there's been a little bit in the media about this lately with the ongoing COVID constraints that we've had and the significant impacts that have had on our supply chain. We have had some delays with our program. So we're currently working with NX2, which is the consortium in the public-private partnership, the PPP. And we're just negotiating with them on when the new opening will be. It will be next year. I don't know when that will be as yet. But we're certainly working through that. A short section has been open since it's been shut again for 3 weeks while we just do some critical work in there. But what that means is that when you come through the tunnels now heading north, that you'll stay on the new viaduct that's been built, but you'll come off the off ramps and then get back onto State Highway 1. But it's good to get that a little bit open.
Yeah.
I think what's going to be very frustrating for a lot of people is that the Matakana link is going to be finished and it's going to be sitting there not used because we haven't got the connection to the work that our PPP needs to do around the roundabout and the connections into that Matakana link. So I think that will be some frustration for some people that we'll just have to manage. The other project.
Mr Mayor,
Sorry, councillor.
May I ask a question?
Thank you. Yes, I had no idea that you were interested. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Councillor.
thank you, Mr Mayor. Hi, Steve, Victoria here. So regarding the Puhoi to walk with extension, can we get the tolls directed to Northland roads? That's one question. If we can't, when are those tolls going to be lifted? And why does Northland have toll roading for our highway, but our transmission gully didn't have tolling? And then I have two further questions, but I'll just leave those set of questions for you to answer. Thank you.
Yes, they're good questions, and Councillor Wills, who does a great job in our Regional Transport Committee, has certainly queried me on this before. So the way that tolling is legislated in New Zealand, you can only toll a section of highway when it meets a certain criteria, and that criteria is very clear and it's robust. Now, the tolling, if the road is tolled, the toll that's collected can only be spent on that particular part of the state highway. So typically what we do is that we use tolling to bring the project forward between Waka Kotahi or the NLTP or the National Transport Fund cannot afford the project. So what it enables us to do is that we can offset the cost so we can bring that project forward. So in terms of the government decided not to toll Puhoi to walk with, but you're probably referring to is the Northern Gateway. Now that was running for 20 years and I can't quite remember off the top of my head, sorry, when that will stop, but it's in a number of years' time, and once that period finishes and that money's paid back, then the toll stops, it comes off. Now, the question around Transmission Gully was that when you look at that criteria on whether roads going to be tolled or not, with Transmission Gully, what it meant was that if there was tolling put on Transmission Gully, the benefits would have been eroded because more people probably would have gone on the alternate route. So therefore, there was not a huge differential saving in time. There was a safety impact to it. But in terms of if we told it, the benefit of Transmission Gully would have been eroded. Now, it's actually a government decision. So Waka Kotahi gets all the information, we do the consultation with the community, we write a report and we give it to the minister. The minister then makes a recommendation to Cabinet and Cabinet makes a decision. So that's why Transmission Gully wasn't tolled. If you look at Waikato Expressway, it's obviously not tolled. That's because there's no easy, free alternate route that can be used by people if they don't want to pay the toll. Northern Gateway's pulled because there is an easy, free alternate route. But once again, the government felt tolling people to walk with would erode or either benefit from that. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Steve. So I'm going to give you another couple of hairy questions. With the government's push for EVs, they ought to be planning for a huge volume of redundant or defunct batteries when they reach end of life. And being aware of our country's struggles and challenges and failures to do with waste management and recycling, does the government have a plan to deal with the EV batteries mountain that will be created? And in efforts to decarbonise our transport sector, is the amount of carbon that will be created from this battery mountain or pile, is that being factored into it as part of the emissions created? Because landfills create emissions. And then I have one more question, but I'll leave that till later. Thank you.
Yeah, they're all really good questions, Councillor, and that is something that the government and Ministry of Transport are looking at. That's not a Waka Kotahi portfolio to look at, but I do know that there is a lot of work around looking at batteries within vehicles and how they can be reused once they're taken out of vehicle. So it could be for storage for home storage. But I'm certainly not involved in those conversations, nor is Waka Kotahi. So that's certainly something that the Ministry of Transport's looking at.
All right, thank you. And we have a question also from Councillor Wills. Councillor Wills, your question, please.
Thanks, Mr. No. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I was just, thanks for your comments, Steve. You said you weren't aware of, or the timing of the opening of the complete project from Pihoi to Warkworth, but the Waka Kotahi media release, according to that, it's sometime between January the 1st and December the 31st next year.
Yeah.
I guess that was done tongue in cheek, considering that when it was asked the question, when it will be open, they've indicated a 12-month span that covers a complete calendar year. But you've just mentioned that there's no tolls on that road, is that correct?
Yeah, there's no tolling on. That was.
So was the initial proposal, as I recall it, there was going to be a toll?
So with any large project like this, there is, when we first do the study, the business case around it, we look to see if it can be tolled, and this particular project could have been. It was eligible for tolling. We then did the review again about a year before we opened, and once again, it could have been tolled. It ticked the boxes, if you like. But as I mentioned, it's actually a government minister and government cabinet decision whether they toll it or not.
Thank you.
Councillor Vincent, then Councillor Withy. Sorry,
Thank you, Mr.
stimulated here regarding
Continue on the same theme. I just wonder if you've opened up the possibility in terms of the funding of the Warkworth to Wellsford section, whether that would have the potential to be a toll road, particularly given the work that's being done through the Dome Valley and all this, establishing a safe alternative toll-free road. Is that something that could be considered?
Yes, so absolutely. The Warkworth to Wellsford is the next stage of the very important Whangarei Auckland corridor. We have done the route protection. That work's been complete, and it is sitting there waiting for some appeals to be looked at around the notice of requirements. So we're just waiting for that to be scheduled. There's absolutely no construction funding put aside for that at all. It's decades out. But as I mentioned earlier, it depends on the government at the time whether they want to wait until the project is needed in terms of its timeframe, or they find some other money, like the New Zealand Upgrade Program, to bring that project forward. And I think that certainly that project would be eligible for tolling due to the alternate free route that's available. There's a whole lot of other criteria as well, but yes.
Right, thank you. We'll keep proceeding. Thanks. I'm watching sorry, Councillor Whitty.
Yeah, while we're talking big projects, Steve, we know that the government's still looking at rationalisation of the port infrastructure in New Zealand. But one of the key things about Northport is that branch line from the main trunk Whangarei to Auckland line to Northport. Could you give us an update just to exactly where we are with that?
Perfect timing with the slide. So
here we are.
this is the Whangarei to Port Marsden highway safety improvements. So just to recap on this. So we were asked by the government under the New Zealand Upgrade Program. So this was the government decision. They found 6.9 billion to invest into 19 projects throughout New Zealand. It was part of a stimulus package from COVID. And one of those projects was the 4-laning and between Whangarei and Port Marsden. Now, what happened was that those projects were all very early scoped, the 19 of them. When we scoped them and got the latest costing, especially around property and risk, the price was a lot higher than what the funding envelope was. So it went back to the government and they gave us direction around what they wanted to do. And one of the things that the government decided was that they were no longer going to invest in a 4-laning option, that they were going to invest in a new rail spur to Northport and then do online safety improvements to the existing state highway. So it was very clear direction by the government. We've been working really closely with KiwiRail over the last year, and our business cases will be going to our board in August. Both the KiwiRail and Whakatahi board. We're engaging with the minister in terms of giving them updates, but that's progressing really well. And we, once our board sign off the business cases, then it'll go to Minister Wood for his final decision around whether he wants to invest in that. So, but the spur line, I think, you know, if you think about rail, it's only like 2% or something with Northland's freight movement. So it's a huge opportunity. But I think it's something that's going to take some time to get the benefits from. So it's just a bit of an update about that. The other piece of work that we're doing, which is, I think, really important, is our Road to Zero, which is making sure that we're really focused on having safer drivers, safer vehicles, safer infrastructure, safer speeds. So just quickly to touch on safer drivers, that we're doing some really good work up in Northland with some pilots around the driver licensing to making it more accessible, making the equitable access to it a lot easier. And we're working with MSD to trial a few things. If it's successful, which I think it will be, we're going to roll it out nationally. So we're looking at mobile driver licensing units that will go to towns. We're trying to get more resources, upskilling our resources to help with that licensing, training and licensing tests. So safer vehicles, we're working with MOT. 43% of fatalities in Northland are in a 1 or 2-star rated car. So it's a 5-star rating. 5 being the highest safety outcomes. 1's been, so there's a huge percentage that people are dying in cars that are not safe. So working with MOT to ban those coming into New Zealand. Safer infrastructure. So we're really investing in Northland, and we're looking at the corridor between Wellsford and Whangarei. So there's 3 sections. There's the northern, central and southern. The southern is in Orohi, which is where we're looking between Wellsford and the south side of the Brinduans. And we've just started that work. We're getting some geotech work. We're talking with some of the neighbours, and we're starting to get our design of what that looks like. And it'll be centreline median barriers, the wire wrap barriers. There'll be widened roads, And there'll be also barriers on the outside the roads in some locations as well. We're currently well progressed in our design for the bit from the northern side of the Brynduans through to the Ruakaka roundabout. And we're looking at putting a roundabout in for Waipu. We're still working with the community about which road that will be. And we've got some money for some early works actually, and we're starting to put some barrier in around the Ruakaka school. So once again, it'll be widened roads, wider centre lines, a wire rope barrier down the middle, which prevents those head-ons. In fact, it was interesting yesterday, I was up in Waitangi and I was driving back last night to Auckland, Ruakaka Straits, beautiful long straight, a big B-train truck just went across the centre line, started heading straight for me. So you can just see how these accidents can happen. Happen in a split second. Luckily, he swerved back onto his side of the road. Otherwise, who knows if I've been here or not.
That piece of road that happens a lot
Yeah,
on that piece of
so
road.
we're really passionate about getting this in. Now, the northern section is part of that other project I just talked about. It's the doing online improvements as part of that New Zealand Upgrade program. So we're still working through that now. So that's through the Taika area.
Sorry,
construction.
so I've had my hand up for quite a while.
Sorry, councillor Wills, we can't see you on the screen, sorry.
Oh, that's your good luck, Mr. Mayor. A really quick question, going back to the licensing, Steve, please. David here. I know there's been a real push by the far north to get greater improvement of licensing. And you've mentioned the mobile service that's been offered. I'll give you a personal experience. My daughter, to get her driver's license, ended up getting it down at Westport in the South Island, because of the lack of spaces available, and also in Dargaville, the inability to get a license because they don't have either an island or traffic lights, is my understanding. As my question is are you looking to not have those as a limiting criteria for people in the more rural areas to get their driver's license?
Yes, councillor. So you've shared that story before, and I fed that back into our organisation because that's just not acceptable. That we need to get our young people and older people sometimes going to other parts of New Zealand to get their licence. We need to make it easy for people to get their licence. The statistics show that if you have good access, good training, and a good licensing system, people will get their licence. And that means that they go on to have better opportunities for getting work, and it just flows into the whole well-being. So another thing that we're doing is that which we talked to the Mayor about a couple of days ago, we're actually re-looking at our regulatory fees and funding. And one of those options too is to actually get rid of the fee, that if a person sits their test and they fail, there's another big fee to pay to resit it. We're going to waiver that fee because we want people to sit their driving tests. We want people to get their driver's license because that gives them all those opportunities to be a safer driver, but also an opportunity to get jobs as well. So the answer is yes, councillor. We're definitely looking to, and those mobile units will help it become better, and also looking at the whole driver licensing system to make sure that you're not disadvantaged just because you live in one region around the road code.
So I'm looking to remove that requirement for a traffic island. I just know in particular down the Polo Peninsula that young people that are not going for their licenses because they have to go to Whangarei to get it. So that's definitely something that is being looked at to make it easier for them to comply with being able to get their license in a place like Dargaville.
Yeah, it's all about making it accessible for all New Zealanders.
Thank you. We've got 7 minutes left for the.
Yep, I think there's 2 more slides quickly. So the other one was safer speeds. So at the moment, the consultation's out at the moment around making speeds more appropriate for our communities. And look, we got really strong feedback from our early work that people are passionate about reducing speeds through townships and outside schools. So that's what we're focused on. So the consultation that's out there at the moment is only focused on townships, schools and marae. And we're looking at reducing the speed limits in towns putting variable speed limits outside schools. So when schools are in, the speed drops to 40 or 30 with the flashing lights that you see, and also putting static signs outside Marae at the moment. So we're currently engaging with people. We're getting lots of good feedback. So if you just encourage your community to provide their feedback on this, that would be really great. So we are going to be looking at open speed roads. We've got a lot of feedback as well around the economic impact and what that means for communities like yourselves. So we're just taking more time to work through that to make our decisions. But this is early one. Let's get this in place. Let's lower the speed limits in our community so our vulnerable users don't get hurt. The last slide here is maintenance operations. I know this is you know, dear to your heart. We've actually completed our pavement and resurfacing for this season, which we did just under 180 kilometres. We've got our program in place for next year, and we're actually doing more again next year, around 187 lane kilometres. There was a lot of feedback beginning of the year around some certain areas which, well, technically we're meeting our levels of service from a community perspective. It didn't look good. So we focused on those. That's the scabbing with a very top layer of the chip seal peels off. Technically, there's nothing wrong with the road, but it's a rough ride, doesn't look good. So we've done some extra money and we've done 5 of the 8, I think. And not, it's not in your region, but we're getting a lot in the far north as the condition of the sealing around railway lines that go across the state highway. That's the Kiwi Rail responsibility. So we're putting a lot of pressure on Kiwi Rail at the moment to make that a safer experience around crossing rail. Thank you, Mayor.
That last slide, Steve, it would have been lovely to have seen that in relation to Kaipara District, regarding when you're talking about the road, kilometres of lane work that you're doing, where that is across the network, because we're aware for Kaipara District citizens that basically they can't get from Mangawhai to Dargaville without driving on the state highway network. And the state highway network is challenged in many locations, as you well know. So we're just mindful of that. So again, the relative Kaipara-ness across your network for these presentations would be very helpful for us.
Okay.
Thank you. We're near the end of the presentation here regarding timing. There are many questions, of course, I'm sure, as a responsible roading company, if you like, for us, regarding Waipu Kotahi. So, elected members, are there any further questions for Steve? Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess following on, Steve, from a discussion we had on the phone a month or two back, engagement with the community, because I hear concerns raised by citizens about they can't get to talk to anybody about their problem that they've observed on the state highway network and so on. And I guess in my idyllic dream, there would be some resource available, not necessarily your very self, but to be able to attend community gatherings face to face to talk about and listen to those concerns. And I mean, across the whole of Northland, that might be quite an onerous obligation, but I just wonder if, you know, I can certainly suggest one little community for a pilot project, if you wanted to follow up on that, which would be Maungataroto, and to see what benefit might come from that in terms of trying to, I suppose the message I've tried to convey to them is to dial back the heat and focus on trying to establish a relationship. And to establish a relationship, one is, I guess you need to take baby steps first and develop some trust and so on. And there are a couple of local projects where assistance from, like, it wouldn't involve money, but it would involve some form of liaison would really be a helpful way to get something off the ground there. And
Yeah, no, really good point and noted. After our conversation, we have set up our regional leadership team. So now we have a dedicated resource for system design, which is looking at the future, for infrastructure delivery, which is our projects that have been happening now, our maintenance and operations, which is, I think, we're talking about, and also engagement and communication. So we'll just reconnect. I'll make sure one of those people get in touch with you and we can make that happen. Ooh.
Thank you, councillor Kerner.
Just supporting what councillor Vincent said, I think it's a great idea. I also, again, was listening to somebody on the radio talking about an initiative to take driver licensing into schools.
Yes.
And that, I think, would work really well for us because of the tyranny of distance that many of our students have, and they live rurally, and yeah, it's very hard to get to a driver and instructor to begin with.
We would love to do that.
Right.
And I know the Auckland Business Chamber, and Auckland does a lot of good work around taking things to schools and school kids. And I think they've taken over 4,000 school kids through the system with support, and they go into schools.
Yeah.
So by using different levers, we can make that happen. But
it's a really efficient way of doing it, because you basically, the car comes up, takes one kid for a lesson, comes back to the school, next kid, and you get sort of 10, 15 kids done in
it's
one
good bang
day.
for your buck. Yeah. And it's all about accessible.
Yeah.
That's how I was taught about banking at Rural Y Primary School in the 1970s. The Post Office Savings Bank used to come into the school, and there was a little desk, and we were all trained money, and you can't take it out again, and yeah. So yes, get them while they're young.
Yes, Steve.
Look, we're at the end of this item. Thank you very much. And just while you're here, Bill, I'd like to thank you particularly for the investment that Waka Kotahi is providing to Kaipara District Council regarding the Kaihu Valley Trail, and here in Mangawhai regarding the Mangawhai Shared Path. So the Mangawhai here is now a $15 million project. It's substantial mode shift coming for the community of Mangawhai. And we're in a great place, looking forward to continued investment from Waka Kotahi. So just while you're here in town, please, what I'm going to say is get on your bike, really, because the shared path that's here is a joy, it's an absolute joy. So thank you for your partnership with Kaipara District Council in this location, and like I say, especially regarding Kaihu Valley Trail as well. Good times ahead with that. And possibly further into the future, the electric ferry network, because we are in 2022 programmed to complete the first of these three great wharves in Kaipara Harbour. And so there's a real opportunity for the electric ferry network between those wharves and Auckland with Helensville or Shelley Beach. And so at that point, that's a significant shift as well, and opportunity for public transport in Kaipara, where there is very little right now. So thank you, Steve, for your presentation today.
Your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving on to mouse file. And on to our next presentation for this morning. We have Jude Thompson from Northland Inc. Is going to be presenting to us the Te Ohanga Rautaki Whānui new work regarding the Regional Economic Development Strategy. And and I'm just looking on the screen there. Sorry, it's gone from the screen. It was looking at Jude and Piripi.
Jude, Piripi, and
so Jude, Piripi, and Paul. Yeah, thank you. So Morena Koto, good morning and welcome to this Kaipara District Council briefing. And we're looking forward to hearing about Te Ohanga Rautaki Whānui. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Oh, great. I was hoping that the presentation might appear in front of us. That's wonderful. Just say thank you for the opportunity to be able to update you as councillors and our Kaikoura Mayor. Apologies that we are not able to be there in person. We've had some illness in the camp. Anyway, so I'm here to update you on Te Ohanga Rautaki Whānui, and as you can see, that is our regional economic development strategy. I just want to make a couple of acknowledgements to start. One is to Anna Curnow, who is the Deputy Chair of the Joint Regional Economic Development Committee, so the committee from the new CCO, and is a great conduit to be able to carry information from you and to you. So just acknowledge Anna in that particular role, and also want to acknowledge our Mayor, Dr. Jason Smith, who has a doctorate in economic development, and we really look forward to the expertise, both academic and lived experience that you can bring. And then obviously an acknowledgement to all the rest of you as councillors, because you are the ones that have those relationships with the communities who are going to be so critical to the strategy. So just as said, we've got Piripi Moore. Some of you may have met Piripi. He is our GM Māori at Northland Inc. And then Vaughan, who is well known to you and is our acting chief executive, but has been here since the beginning of this journey. So I've really only come into this space a couple of months ago. Perhaps we could move to the next slide. Thank you. So we are just at the start of this journey. So I want to acknowledge if you're feeling that you perhaps have got some information gaps about where this is, we are at the start. But just, I thought it was helpful just to put some whakapapa there. I know you will have read the paper, but just to say that this was formally raised a couple of years ago through the Mayoral Forum, and the discussions about doing it and what it might be have evolved over the last couple of years to the point where in our SOI for Northland Inc. this year, it said we will lead the development of this strategy. Like all things we do in Northland, I think we do it well. This is going to be a partnership approach. So it's about our communities, local government, central government, iwi hapu Māori, particularly business and industry, coming together to make this happen. It has been agreed that it will be Te Tiriti based, that it will be co-designed, which basically means we just all get around the table and we design it together, and that it's intergenerational, that it looks to tackle the major issues. And it was really exciting to come on the end of that, Waka Kotahi conversation and thinking about innovations like electric ferries. So perhaps we'll move to the next slide. In terms of the process, you will have seen in your paper that there was an appointments panel. An expression of interest process has been run and concluded, and the 12 names that you see there, those are the people who are on the steering group who will oversee and guide the development of the strategy. So just noting also down the bottom there that Eru Linden, probably also well known to you, formerly the Regional Commissioner MSD, now the Public Service Commissioner for Te Tai Tokiro, and also Rebecca Evans, our chair of Northtec subsidiary, sit outside of that, but are going to be advocates, sponsors, champions, and assisting with those conversations in and out of Wellington. So if we move to the next slide, and I should apologise, we'll take questions at the end. So there's a core project team which has been established within Northland Inc. So I'm the program lead, and I have Piripi and Vaughan alongside me, along with a lady called Sarah, who works also in our Extension 350 team. As we know in Northland, we generally have to do a lot with little. So our approach here is to build a wider virtual team. So have representatives from entities such as the 4 councils of Northland, such as the MSDs, the MPIs, industry themselves, and just build that network. So we've got some key points of contact. We've started some early engagement. We talked with Northern Regional Council yesterday, so you are next for us to initiate this discussion with. We've also had engagement with Te Kaho Taunui, the iwi Leaders Group, and the Taitokoro Māori Advisory Council of NRC, and some of the agencies. Again, I can't reiterate more. This is really the start of the journey. Also had an opportunity this week to talk to a couple of people who've come into Northern Regional Council around climate change and look to draw in their expertise, which is quite fortunate. Alongside of getting the structure set up, because it's about getting a result and outcomes for our communities at the end, we are doing a work stream, having a look around New Zealand and offshore about some of those, what we would call exemplar economic development strategies, and just see what some of the lessons are that we can learn from that. The most recent strategy in New Zealand to be completed is the West Coast, and I can circulate that link if it's of any interest to anyone. I think that they've done a really good job. Also, you are well aware that we have a multitude of plans and strategies and reports and documents in this space called economic development, or that talk to the economy across the north. Some of them are very district specific, some are more distilled than that, and some are quite broad. So having a look at that and seeing what that whole ecosystem, that environment looks like. And one, I just want to seed as we go along that we have, particularly as officers, a view, maybe there's an opportunity to rationalise some of these groups as we go along, because I'm sure for you, many of you will go to meetings and it might be a different kaupapa, a different topic, but you see many of the same faces. And so are we diluting the effort that we could be making for Kaipara, Far North, Whangarei, the whole of Northern, and could we do a better job if there was some rationalisation? But that's just a thought as we go through. Next slide, thank you. So what actually is going to happen now? The steering group has been appointed. They will meet very soon. And as you can see there on the slide, this is what we're looking for them to do. Set the direction and vision, identify what the priorities are. We need an actionable work program out the end of this, so things are going to happen. We need the people that are on there and leaders such as yourselves in the community to be able to advocate for the outcomes, because we know that without having resources, we are not going to be able to implement. So there's going to be a lot of conversations that need to happen along the way. It's really important also that there's a diversity of voice into this engagement. So we recognise we need the strong kaipara voice. Those such as yourselves know the intimacy and complexity of the kaipara, and that needs to be able to come through, because if you're not in the kaipara and in roles like yourselves, then you don't get that flavour coming through and you don't know what the issues are. So it's not just place-based. You may note on the group we have what we would consider a couple of younger voices. So it's really exciting to have Justice Heteraka and Shane Witahira on there that can represent that voice. But in saying that, we obviously want to reach out too. We need to hear the voice of the youth in kaipara. And we'll be looking for them to assist us with that along with you. Timelines. So for all of this kōrero, all of the talk, we recognise life feels like a marathon at the moment, but we do need to pick up the pace, and we're aiming to have this completed or as near to complete by Christmas. So that is our aspiration. I'm reminded that, you know, sometimes things can take as long as the time frame you set. So if we put that PO in the ground and say, right, let's get this done, then we really hope that we were able to come back to you, that might be in the new year, and say, here it is. So I think that's probably all the slides. No, that was quite a bit of download and open to questions. I'm not sure if my colleagues have anything to add, but perhaps because I know we only have a little time, we'll just take questions and invite Vaughan or Piripi to respond if needed.
Thank you, Jude. Look, that's very clear. Gavin, if you could bring the faces back to the screen, that would be help rather than the presentation. Thank you. Thanks for that presentation, very clear. I have a question for you, and it's a really simple one. We go back to, I'm going to call it the 2002, 20 years ago, economic development strategy for Northland, and you were involved with that, and I was involved in that time as well, operatively in economic development here in the north. And I'm going to put this absolutely on the table, that the number one priority strategy for all of Northland at that time, and I can see you nodding, was of course the 4-lane highway between Whangarei and Auckland. That was identified as just the biggest thing to open up Northland's economy and to connect us to the rest of New Zealand at that time. You know, roads are a real political football, and the road gets kicked around a lot. I'm interested in the composition of the board that you have here, including government representatives who are actually basically representing governments and will be doing the government's work in saying, well, the government's priority is this and this and this, and not that and that and that. How do you get a Northland strategy that's what Northland wants, rather and not have those overlays of actually, well, this is what the government wants?
I'm happy to have first shot at this. So looking at the composition, my view is that those non-government representatives, which I would suggest are more rather than less on the group, are there to bring what Northland needs and wants to the fore, and that those that are in the government positions are there to champion what we ask them to do, rather than having the tail wagging the dog by pots of money or policy priorities being there, and then us having to play to what those policy or those funding pots are. Vaughan, did you want to add to that at all? No?
That's interesting, thank you. Thank you, but it's a risk that I flagged for you, okay?
Thank you.
It needs to be Northland's. Thank you. And we've got Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock has a hand up. Councillor Withy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora tātou. So my question's about the steering group, Regional Economic Development for Te Tai Tokerau. What can it do to support resilient communities with the issues we face? And this is coming to me from my constituents about food security issues. So what are the wins that we can get for economics within facing the challenges that we have? And then I segue into, I would like to hear that there is at the table a representative not just for youth, which of course who should be there, but youth leaders, and I mean educators. So the politics in the high schools and other educational institutions, they are the capability and the talent producing.
Thank you for your question. I might address the second one first, and perhaps I'll let Vaughan answer the first one. I'm really glad you said that about educators and leaders in education. When I looked through the West Coast strategy, which is the most recent one that has happened in New Zealand, the very first hui that they held was they went to all of the I'll say head girl and head boy or prefect level within the schools. Not necessarily always what I would consider to be the right start. However, in terms of the environment, they went to all of those young leaders first. The very first hui's that they held is said, we need to hear the voice from that sector of our communities before we even go any further. And so I think those are the types of considerations that we should look at, because it's pretty easy to do really. And we know they're always eager to contribute and have a lot different view than someone like myself who's probably more in the older category now. So thank you for that. And we will note that, and it's really top of mind. Vaughan, did you want to address the first question?
Yeah, sure. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Nice to see you all this afternoon. It's slightly difficult to say exactly what strategy is going to pop out and what action is going to occur. But I do think can be really confident in saying that that whole food security, food production will be a key driver within the strategy. And I think also the strategy is going to have to look at the geographical differences around our region. So you're going to find yourself addressing those things of concern to you. Exactly how, I'm not totally sure yet, because we haven't written it and we haven't predetermined what comes out of it. The other thing I do think, as a slightly generic comment, there's a steering group, and there's certain people represented in there. They're not going to cover everything, and that's the idea of having a layer below where we make sure we do engage with a whole range of entities and we do engage with a whole range of topics. But I'm very confident that that topic will rise to the surface really quick.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Withy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, Jude, as you know, I'm also with Anna on the CCO representing the Kaipara District as one of the shareholders in Northland Inc. And I guess the statement you've made here about the steering group has been now appointed, which will set the strategic direction and vision. However, as you will well know, we as the shareholders in the CCO have set a statement of intent, which your chair and chief executive signed off on. And what I guess I'm not seeing here in the paper or your presentation is the linkage between what we have said in that statement of intent as shareholders and what we expect Northland Inc. to achieve and a strategic direction. And unless there's a link there, there is the risk of having if you like, not an association between the steering group's strategic direction and what the shareholder group has issued in a statement of intent. Just like you to comment on that, please.
I think I would look to our acting CE to respond, Peter, if that's okay.
Yep, sure.
Yeah, afternoon, Peter. I think important to recognise what we're talking about here is development of a strategy for the region, and so setting strategy for what the region would like to see achieved. The statement of intent is setting our vision for how we deliver, and we are only one of a number of parties who need to be at the table in terms of delivering outcomes that the strategy wants to achieve. It will need council support, both regional and district. It will need central government. It will need a whole range of people. What I do foresee is once the strategy is done, we need to relook at our statement of intent with our shareholder and say, do we need to adjust our vision and our actions based on what we've seen being developed through the strategy? So I think the current document is a right approach, but we will need certainly to work with you. And the point of trying to get all of this work done by the end of the year is so that we have time to work it through in the next statement of intent, as well as work it through with councils in their next long-term plan. So we are being a little bit deliberate about ensuring we allow those opportunities to be there to relook at our own implementation documents, our statement of intent, your long-term plans.
Kia ora no tātou. Just one other point in terms of the design of the steering group. There are 2 seats that were given as of right, and one of them is the chair of the committee, and Justin Blakey, and also one of our directors, who's Liz Oliver. So where the others were appointed, those 2 were given seats right from the very beginning, and they are there to represent our interests and our statement of intent and the relationship between us and you. So there is that check and balance in the process as well.
Kia ora, that's clear. Thank you. Councillor Curnow.
I just wanted to first of all acknowledge Peter as my co-member on the Joint Regional Economic Development Committee. So it's good to have Peter there too. Yeah, I just wanted to stress that perhaps for those who haven't been part of this journey until, up until where we've got this, the expectations that the committee has set around this economic development strategy is that it is rooted in looking at those sort of key indicators of where we are as a sort of region, sort of things like economic, employment and health and things like that, and looking at how economic development can improve those statistics. And part of that also looks at climate change and building resilience. And so it's not a sort of traditional economic development strategy in that it's all about how do we grow big business. It's about looking at what does Northland need and how do we use economic development to achieve that. And so that's been very clear from the committee that that's what we want to see this deliver. And I want to congratulate the team for the work done. It might feel that there hasn't been a lot going on up until now, but a lot of that's been about building relationships and making connections so that we can hit the ground running now that we've got the steering group landed. They can get on with the work, and sort of delivering by the end of the year is an ambitious achievement given where we are now. But I look forward to seeing that happen because I think the foundations have been built to make this work quickly now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Another piece of direction from me and advice, please, and it's spurred by what Deputy Mayor Curnow's just said with her experience on the board, if you like, of Northland Inc. And the steering committee there, there is a very broad church of definitions about what economic development is. And I just urge in your strategy preparation that up front you state exactly the boundaries around the definition that you're using. So what it is and what it's not. Lists of what this economic development strategy is and what it is not going to do. And like I say, regarding definitions, and I'm just going to use the World Bank definition of economic development, is quite different from socially enabled, close to the ground definitions of economic development. They're all economic development. Yeah, it's a very broad church. So I'm just urging everyone to be just crystal clear on what the definitions are going to be as the strategy is prepared, so that you can take everyone in the waka together clearly and people don't think it's meaning something when it's actually something else.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I also just share with you that yesterday at Northland Regional Council, there was a little bit of time for some discussion, and a lot of that centered around what is intergenerational. So I value your feedback around getting definitions around what aspects are and what aspects aren't. And so that just lay that in front of you, as well as the discussion about what does intergenerational mean in that respect yesterday to those councillors, because it was very broad. I should just say very diverse in terms of the contributions back to that question.
That's right. It's a broad church. Yeah. So, best wishes and best of luck with your strategy preparation. I think it's very, very ambitious to do this in 6 months. I think it's extraordinary. So, good luck with that. And we're all right here, these elected representatives, very close to the communities, if you want further advice or linkages on your journey. Yeah.
Thank you again, appreciate it. And we will certainly look to you, because we will need that, because you hold the relationships.
All right. Thank you today, and wishing you well. Thank you for your presentation. Kia pai tō ahi ahi.
Mauri ora kia koutou.
Thank you. At this point, Gavin, we'll move on to our next and final presentation for today's council briefing, which is the Three Waters Northern Waters update. For this, we have a presentation which is taking place in the room with us. We have Sue Davidson, our General Manager for Strategic Investment. You added I in it, Strategic Investment. And we have Anine Nama, who is our acting General Manager for Infrastructure. And so this is the first presentation of Anine to the elected members in person. So it's wonderful to have you here with us today. Yeah, so thank you very much for being here, and we're looking forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elected. It's a pleasure to be here and meet you. I'd like to just take the report as read, but take the opportunity to take you through a couple of key points in the presentation. Noting that this will be one of many briefings on the Three Waters as we get clarity of the DIA. Today's briefing is largely focused on the Northern Waters work that we have. So the purpose of this presentation is just to provide an update on Northern Waters Working Group, and I'll elaborate their membership in a minute. But also inform the elected members that the Department of Internal Affairs and the National Transition Unit, which is part of DIA, set up to oversee the Three Waters transition, has given briefings to the Whangarei elected members and the Far North elected members. So I think there's an opportunity if the members would like to do so, take place as well. Northern Waters collaboration, so NTA seems to be the talking point today. So there are 4 entities that the government are proposing, A, B, C and D. Today, talking about entity A, hasn't been formed yet. Legislation has to be passed through the House for that to occur. But about a year ago, we set up a collaboration of the Northern plus Watercare. We saw it as an opportunity to work collaboratively, irrespective of whether the reform goes ahead or not, and that'll continue irrespective of whether reform proceeds or not. So the membership is there. It starts with the Council, Watercare, Kaipara, Whangarei, Far North District, but we'll also introduce Northern Regional Council. They play quite a big part. And this, Auckland City is a unitary council, so they have both council and regional council functions. So we did bring in Northern Regional Council to provide that regional overview. The DIA NTU are looking to set up a local transition team. Now they're just going through the throes of figuring out what that looks like and what that means. But essentially, it's the first official stage of the transition. The second official stage of the transition will be when the bill's passed, which I'll cover off a little bit further down. The NTU have also signalled that they will be providing some funding for each of the councils to support them through transition. The timetable and the amount is still yet to be delivered to councils, and the transition unit is working on that process as we speak. The Northern Waters have created a number of work streams. They're largely aligned to the NTA work streams that have been stood up. I won't go into each of those. They are covered off. The work streams are covered off in that the NTU is doing. Just from what we're doing is from a people space, we're just trying to identify who the people in the Three Waters are. You can sort of appreciate that with Watercare, it's 100% of staff are involved in Three Waters. Within the councils, it's a mix, FTE proportion. So again, just doing a bit of a stock take in terms of how many staff are involved in Three Waters. Just in terms of planning and capital delivery, again, we're just looking at opportunities to align our work. Some of the areas that we are working on is potentially asset management plan. So there's some work going on with within the Northern Waters, but also the National Transition Unit as part of coming up with an asset management framework. Capital delivery, just looking at where we can align programs and make sure that we've got continuity of supply and work going forward. Stormwater is a little bit of a challenge at the moment in the sense that we've identified the easy paths that can be transferred, the pipe network. Land drainage is a big issue. So there's a little work stream that's going on at the moment that's going to start to unbundle what land drainage actually is and where does it sit going forward. So that's going to be a determination between the new water services entity and the regional council / local council. But there's a little bit of work going on just to sort of unbundle that and what it actually means. Operations and maintenance, again, we're just looking to align where we can. Water safety plans is an area that we believe we can align on. We all have to do it. We've all got a regulator that we need to comply to. So what synergies can we do there? And I guess lastly, technology. We all use technology from our plants to talk to us to warn, early warning. So what are the opportunities that we can leverage to get, one set of tools that talk to each other? Because at the moment they are disparate. The main focus though on the Northern Waters Group is to make sure that staff are in the right space and that the staff are involved in transition activities to move into the new entity should that take place. But also for the service providers, we found in 2010 when the Super City was formed that there was a pause on the pipeline work, which just disrupted the industry. So we want to make sure that we don't do that this time around. So making sure that we've got a continuation of work that's through the LTP.
Got the joke, by the way. Pipeline of work.
Right.
Big up.
Sorry, and Councillor De Lavaris, I'm aware that your hand is up. What we'll do is we'll get Anine to complete his presentation and then we can circle back. Okay, so we'll have our questions then at the end of his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I did talk about some legislation that the government's putting through the House. In Bill 1, there's an exposure draft for consultation now. It's being ratified as we speak. It's likely to be introduced into the House in July, and then we'll go through the parliamentary process with the Bill 1 is really allows the establishment of the 4 entities physically, then to allow the appointments of the chief executive and the boards, who then will go through a process of appointing management. Bill 2, quite an important bill. It outlined the powers and functions of the new entity. A lot of some of the powers and functions are within bylaws. Most are within the Local Government Act. So they need to be unbundled, and those will be pushed into Bill 2 to ensure that the new entity can still function as it does today. And the overall timeframe is to have all 4 entities operational by 1 July 2024. Quite aspirational. It's a timetable that the government has set. We can take questions and we can answer. I'll take that question.
Thank you. So we'll go to Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock and then Councillor Withy. Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be more questions also. Thank you. Councillor De Lavaris Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, my first question is, who is funding the Northern Waters Group? Is it ratepayers or DIA?
It's been funded by DIA, so they have provided a tranche of money earlier on last year, and Northern Waters is predominantly funded through that, although there are officers' times that obviously, officers from each of the councils are picking up their own cost associated with that. But where there is external resources required, that's being funded through DIA.
Okay, and is there a clear accounting for those costs that is transparent?
Yes, there is. Costs at the moment are housed through Auckland Council. So all of those costs have to go through a business case process where money is required to access those funds. and they go through an approval process commensurately.
Right, thank you very much. I have received what are now called activity management plans, which were formerly called assets. And I have reviewed the costings for the wastewater, water supply and stormwater. And it appears that there is no value assigned to the disposal field assets that Kaipara ratepayers own, such as the Browns Road, Lincoln Downs property. I understand it's about 132 hectares. I may be wrong, the hill part, but the disposal field itself is 65 hectares of land that the ratepayers have bought and purchased. And I'd like to know why that isn't specified as an asset in the valuations of our asset management plan dated June last year. Thank you.
So through the mayor, and it's quite a detailed question, but I'll answer it. Those are asset management plans of, but basically the plant, that's what that's referring to. The land is kept in the fixed assets register because the reason it's not on the asset management register for waste would be because of the fact that there's not maintenance use that you're doing on land. So it's kept in the fixed assets register, but as we know, a lot of our records of the past are not that clear anyway, so there will be a lot of work that we have to do from this. And one of it will be identifying the land and looking at what is it used for and whether it can be transferred or not. And the land has been identified and it is actually in our LTP. The farmland was purchased at a cost of 7.2 million.
Thank you, Sue. So I'm understanding from what information you've just supplied, although it's hard for me to hear for some reason, maybe if you move the microphone closer to your seat position. So I'm hearing that there's some uncertainty about the ownership, that if the government is successful in pushing through these reforms, my question is, will the government take the asset of Browns Road from us, off us, and the Waitawa Reservoir? Will those assets be taken off our Kaipara ratepayers? And if so, what is their compensation? Because I asked many questions about this, including the Thelma Road property, which is part of the Mangawhai Community Park. That is where the plant is. That is not on a separate title, and the Mangawhai Community Park is owned by the community, owned by the ratepayer, and also the golf course, where the planning for the new disposal field is currently being administered and costed. Will that also be taken off the ratepayer? These are important questions. I would like them answered as best you can.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. It's a level of detail that the DIA have not gone down at the moment. They're just looking at a stocktake of all the land, and they've used Kaipara as an example because it was a small piece of area that they could do their overlay and identify all the land that is associated with Three Waters. That's phase one. Phase two, in terms of what does get transferred, hasn't occurred yet, and that will occur a little bit further down the track. As a guiding principle, they will look to see what is primary use and what is not primary use. But it's a level of detail that I think we'll probably get in a couple of months, if not 3 or 4. And then in terms of the compensation component, that will be further down the track once we determine, the DIA determine what assets need to be transferred over.
Thank you, Armin, but I have looked at the Three Waters DIA Better Off package. They talk about the $16 million. I have added the plant and the pipes and the point of supply values assigned, recent valuations. even though they don't take into account the recent inflationary costs of everything. But I came up with a lump sum of $244 million that our plant and pipes for the three waters are valued at as of 2018, 2019. How is it that we are looking at, by the 30th of September, accepting a $16 million so-called better off package, when this district has borne so much financial pain to pay for, in particular, Mangawhai wastewater scheme and plant and land, and there is no detail in the funding of better off package that we are meant to agree to about anything to do with compensation for loss of these assets. And so I would like, if you can, as a team member, as a staff member of our council, to push back against these reforms and not let out before us. Allow me to finish. In a neutral way before the political representatives of this district, and at no time are we able to give voice to the concerns that are coming at us through our email boxes and through phone calls and community groups. Can you please consider that when you bring this neutral presentation, that this is a highly contentious little matter?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. I think there's an opportunity for elected members to provide that feedback and seek some clarity from the Department of Internal Affairs and NTU, the National Transition Unit, which I just outlined that, there's an opportunity in July for that process to take place. I think as an officer, I can't comment on any matters political, but the opportunity will be there in July to provide that. My understanding is that the better off funding is not linked to compensation of assets. It's a tranche of money that is available to councils if they wish to choose to take it up to provide services for their community. In terms of compensation or transfer, as I said to you, Councillor, it will come at a later stage once there's further clarity around which assets be transferred. And then the transfer mechanism is something that still needs to be worked through, and it's a good opportunity to seek from the Department of Internal Affairs what that process is likely to be.
Thank you, Armin.
Through the chair, I'll just add to that. So staff are really aware of what has to be done. And as I say, our records aren't as clear from the past, and there's a lot of rebuilding that we're going to have to do and be able to answer the questions for the DIA and also for councillors that will come. So we have to look at our reserves. We have to look at our internal loans. We have to make sure we've got up-to-date figures for those. We've got to have up-to-date analysis of all bits of land, where they are, what functions they're performing, so that we understand before anything is done legally that we're happy to have it transferred, and we understand the so we do understand there's a huge amount of work for our staff to do in order for this to be facilitated.
Thank you. And then I have a question for you, and it's about I'm going to call it the pilot work, and this is the first we've heard of this, which is being done regarding Kaipara's three waters systems as a kind of test bed, if you like, for what's around the edges or whatever. So I'm delighted to hear about that. I'd love to know much more about that. And I'm particularly interested in the fact that Kaipara District Council has 29 drainage districts. And I'm aware that the principles of the proposed Three Waters reforms encapsulate all of that. What I'm interested in regarding the drainage districts, if you look at the very ancient floodplain of Raupo or right through the North Kaipara agricultural delta, what I'm interested in is how that for a drainage district as against, here's a pipe which is contained, a drainage district which is all of the land in a basin of a valley, if you like, yeah? How that is being weighed up, measured, excluded, included, what the boundaries are of what's being talked about or not, and how on earth you can calculate or estimate the value of a land drainage network such as the Raupo one with all its floodgates that keeps that area of land, if you like, with the road running to it between Mangawhai and Dargaville, if you like, the state highway network, the electricity network, the schools that are there, the agricultural production, the other community aspects, the towns, the churches, the marae, all of which are within that land drainage network, and how you value that. Because it becomes particularly, it's a long way away from stormwater alone, okay, which is different again, and it's a long way away from here's a leaky water pipe in a Wellington city street with a geyser that everyone can see on TV. You know, we're talking about a very different aspect here. It is, in my view, from having been on the government's working group, that would be absolutely what I'm talking to here, included in the Three Waters reforms and in the Three Waters networks. How do we value that? Does it matter about valuing it? Come back to Councillor De Olivares Woodcock's point, because then you're suddenly saying it's every square inch of the North Kaipara agricultural delta, which is it's 250 square kilometres. And then you go, wow, where are we going with all this? And it becomes very interesting. Okay, so that's the first thing. So I'd like you to do some work on that, please. But also, I've got a second question on page 29 of this agenda. Just for clarification, in the water services bills item here, you've talked about the entities will no longer be part of local government. New legislation is required to ensure they have the same powers. Can you please talk further into what those same powers are? Because right now, local government, of course, is elected, and the water entities are not elected. They're not actually accountable to the people. They can't be turfed out if the people don't like them, as happened with Kaipara District Council in the past. You know what I mean? So can you just talk now briefly to what the notion of the same powers are? Share that with us, please.
Thank you, Michelle. I will do. And if I may come back and just respond on the main drainage.
Certainly.
So in terms of, I mean, the water entities by the current governance structure will be owned by local council. So by no means the comment says it won't be the same powers or functions. It'll just be that is taken away, but the ownership is still going to be through a shareholding within the council structure. So won't go into too much detail on that because that will come out once the NTU or DIA ratify that structure. Although my understanding is that the minister has already done so. In terms of the powers and functions, there's a lot of entry powers within the bylaws. There's a lot of prosecution works that can be provided to the service provider today to go on to somebody's land to rectify drainage or issue warrant officers to go where people have blocked overland flow paths, for example, or they've got a pipe that they are wasting water and they're not choosing to repair. There's certain mechanisms within bylaws for council, which is then transferred down to a water provider like Watercare to go and enforce. Similarly, within the Local Government Act, there's entry power. So if somebody refuses to put a pipe through their property, there's powers that can be, there's powers within the Local Government Act that allow the council to then go and enforce the pipe to go through. So there's multitudes of powers that exist today that would need to be transferred through to the new entity to ensure that those powers that council had, the entity still has. Now, in time, so if you want to, we could outline what they are and provide a briefing back to council. That's something that can be done. That's very easy. That's work is going on in the background anyway, and I can certainly provide that level of detail if that's what the elected members wish to see.
Thank you. Further down the track, that would be really good, because I understand it's also going to include the power of rating, that the entity will be able to rate, just as councils do.
I'm sort of I briefly talked about the engineering side of it too, but there are other powers that will materialise as a result of that. I can bring a paper back to the elected members further down the track.
Looking forward to that. Thank you.
Just in terms of the land drainage, so I do note, I mean, coming into Kaipara, I've taken a different view in terms of what land drainage is. I didn't appreciate it at the start. Certainly have taken a different view, and I do agree with you that it is very complex and it's not straightforward. There is a small working group that has been set up. Myself from Kaipara with Donick is on that group with the Northern Regional Council and the other regional councils, just to try and to understand what will come through, if any, through to the entity. And so we come back to what's its primary purpose, and if the primary purpose is flood protection, then there is good reason that it can remain with council. However, there's a function of maintenance on stop banks, floodgates, etc. And that can be easily done through a service level agreement. So the ownership still retains within council, district councils, but there's an opportunity for the maintenance to be outsourced to the water services entity. So that function is continued. I'm not saying that that's the answer. I'm just giving that as an example. But I am happy to come back to elected members once we get a bit more definition with that small working group. Certainly to bring it back to the elected members to get some guidance, but also an opportunity for feedback.
Okay, thank you. So I would request, it would be great to have you attend a Raupo Drainage Committee meeting to meet with that group, just regarding the difference between flood protection and land drainage, because they are two different spheres, if you like, which overlap in that space. They're quite distinct. So our land drainage districts are about draining water away after it's rained rather than keeping floods out, if you like. But they do that too. So it's very complicated then regarding engagement with regional council. It's very, very complicated space.
And hence my, I'd like to come back once we get a bit more clarity with that group, a bit more definition, just to make sure that, you know, what I say I fully understand, and there's an opportunity to be educated, but also some guidance on as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Curnow.
Oh,
sorry, Councillor Withy.
You cut in ahead of me, I'm just let you do that.
Sorry, Councillor Withy.
I had my hand up before you two. Just on the side.
And then Councillor Wills. Councillor Withy, Councillor Curnow, Councillor Larson, then Councillor Wills.
Now we got it right. Right, okay. Yeah, slightly different tack. On your second slide, the entities have laid out what the likely costs per annum for individual takers of water, etc. are. 800 in the case of entity A with reform and almost 2,200 without. And roughly across the whole of the country, each of the entities without reform is about roughly 3 times what it is with reform. Now, these are very emotive figures, and they're ones that have been used in government information that have been spread through the country in recent months. When PwC, I think it was, that peer reviewed this, they believed that those figures, based on the assumptions that were used in making them, were plus or minus 50%. Now, in anybody's language, that is a huge margin of error. So if the government continues to use these figures, as they obviously are, to try and persuade or to even scare people into supporting the new entities, are they taking a similar responsibility in saying we will cap a maximum of, say, 10 or 20% of those figures, that when these entities get up, they will not exceed that. Because I see there's a very moral dilemma here. If a government uses figures to almost, scare people into taking a support position, but then don't actually back them up in some way, then really, I see that as a moral dilemma, quite frankly. If you've seen anything out of DIA that would suspect or suggest that they are going to in some way have a maximum cap on what the annual cost would be for ratepayers on these new entities?
Through you, Chair, no, I haven't. I am familiar with the PwC work that was undertaken last year. My understanding is that it was matched with the works that Wix did, the Scottish Water Industry Commission. And PwC did moderate it back to reflect the true cost of the entity's costs today. I don't have any comments, sorry, Sir, on whether the government will be backing the figures or not. What I can offer is two things. I can offer PwC to come and provide the briefing that they have provided, or had made the report available and had done a number of briefings to a number of councils. I'm not quite sure if Kuiper were part of that. I wasn't here at that time. But that's an opportunity for you to ask more detailed, specific questions about the makeup of the financials. But with respect to the cost, my understanding is it is a balance sheet issue where there is some cap on debt to revenue availability, and hence with the economic regulator, there's more opportunity for that debt leveraging. But I would say that the economic regulator would be the policeman that will be overseeing the financials, amongst other things, of the water entity. And so I think as the economic regulator bill comes out, there would be an opportunity to feed back any concerns all through the select committee process on that particular bill.
Yeah, we've certainly had all the PwC report. We had access to that.
So you have seen the PwC report?
Yes, yeah, we've seen the report, cool. and I've given my opinion on it. So I think what has happened through the mayor is that we are being asked for how we rate what are the development contributions. So there are people in the finance team in Northern Waters is working on that. So they're working out some sort of scenarios. What's the total cost going to be and then obviously they'll come up with a scenario what it's likely to be charges. Now whether those are then fed back to councils, I don't know, but I know that we have been asked for that sort of information.
Councillor Curnow.
Yeah, I just wanted to dart back onto the land drainage. If you have a little working group working on that topic, I'm wondering whether it might be a good idea to involve the chair of the Rāpua Drainage Committee in some of your discussions, because there's extensive history that he understands and understanding of how the network works together, both as a land drainage and flood protection system. And another thing just to throw in, that many years ago I was involved in a governance review of land drainage, and one of the complexities that came out of that was that the ownership of the land drainage assets is complex and unclear and inconsistent. Some land farmers own, some council owns, some DOC owns, and so there's a real tenuousness about how you can enforce service levels when you're dealing with sort of privately owned land so that, I'm interested to hear that there is the thought that maybe those stay with councils, because those complexities would be, I don't know how you'd unravel those for a transfer. Yeah.
The main principle that we were working on is that no asset gets strapped. This is the primary objective. And then you work out where is the best sat.
Yeah.
And if it's predominantly private land, although there's still the function of maintenance
Yeah.
on the banks and the stop gates. So then where does that best sit?
Yeah.
You know, if you've got the expertise in a water services entity, it doesn't mean that the ownership needs to transfer. It just means that.
I think one shouldn't underestimate the expertise that lies with those drainage committees. They know that these guys grew up swimming in those drains, you know. They do know how they work, probably better than many experts. And it may be that there's an opportunity to pair that expertise, but it would just seem really unfortunate if we were to lose that community expertise. And the other thing is that the efficiency with which they get stuff done is probably far outweighs anything we could do because there's so much goodwill involved. And that goodwill also means that it's possible to do things that if there wasn't the goodwill, you might have to go through the courts to get done. So it's just, there's a soft side of that arrangement that is actually critical to it working well and efficiently. And it'd be really unfortunate to see that disappear in this mix.
And through you, Chair, there is an underlying obligation that whatever assets do get transferred is through agreement with council, regional council. So there is that protection there. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. From my observation, and certainly we'll take, bring the chair on board. But I'd also like to come back to this committee so that, sorry, the council, so there's no surprises and we can get.
But just that he's very aware of the changes that are being proposed and he's very knowledgeable in this space and would be, I think, very willing to be part of discussions.
Thank you, councillor Larson, then councillor Willow.
I think to move things on, I'll just leave it. I was coming back to the thing that you hadn't spoken to was the power to rate, and obviously there's somewhere to go with that in terms of the high level arguments around where is the democratic accountability with the non-elected board. But let's carry on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wills.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mine's just a comment rather than a question. I did listen carefully to the verbal presentation that went with the written one, and you, how to put this, you constantly referred to use of word ownership, and I'd like to challenge you in this discussion because it's not about ownership, it's about control, and that's the thing we're ceding to this restructure. And it's almost like it was a dogma with your presentation. I think I might have even counted the number of times you used the word council still has ownership. But like I said, I challenge you on the fact that we've conceded effective control of these assets. And that's the important thing as a councillor, that our community needs to understand that difference between ownership and control. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a statement there. So thank you. And then we'll just leave that there. Elected members, I think we're at the end of this.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, but it is, but it's also a question as to the understanding of the staff, though they can't get involved in the politics. There's an understanding of the difference because the information they're putting out is what our community is seeing in this process.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, so my question, if you want me to word it in a question, my question is, do the staff understand the difference and will they communicate it to their community accurately?
Okay, thank you. You had said that it was a statement, not a question. You've now made it a question. So thank you for clarifying your intent there. There's a question here regarding definition.
Yeah. So through you, Chair, the facts are the facts and they will go through legislation, and when they become law, then I think then there's the opportunity to put those facts to the community. The council does, with the global community, does have the opportunity to go into select committee submissions if they choose to do so. But that is a decision that the council needs to make, and individuals do need to make. But I do note Councillor Will's question that there are nuances between the two. We certainly understand that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's highly political space, this. But thank you for the presentation today and bringing us up to date on Northern Waters and the sense, if you like, of coordination that's going on linked with the transition unit in the background. We appreciate that there's a lot of work going on. This is on top of business as usual for the council. What people are just wanting from us is business as usual. They're not wanting all this additional work that you're having to do. So thank you for the work that's going on here, and thank you for the presentation today. It's been very, very clear. Thank you. At this point, we'll adjourn whānau for lunch break, and we're resuming, I'm going to say we're resuming at 1:30 p.m. Okay, so we will resume at 1:30 p.m. Thank you.
Now we're down the road to 4.